have candid conversations about the people and nations with whom they deal.
Shortly after Cablegate, the Swedish government issued an arrest warrant for Assange on allegations of rape and molestation. He claimed the allegations were fabricated to get him extradited to the United States, a claim the U.S. government denied. Either way, Assange's next move was
to seek refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy, which really was the beginning of the new chapter in his life and what we're dealing with now, which is him being stuck in London.
What was supposed to be an office in an embassy is now Assange's self-imposed prison to this very day. But that doesn't mean he's slowed down. Since being trapped in the embassy, WikiLeaks has released files about Guantanamo Bay prisoners, Syrian political figures, and the draft to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And then came the 2016 U.S. election.
Thousands of leaked emails showed Democratic Party officials possibly plotting against Bernie Sanders in his race against Hillary Clinton.
Over the course of 68 days, WikiLeaks released 20,000 confidential Democratic National Committee emails. In terms of the presidential race, if you look right here, when Assange released the first batch of emails, Trump actually takes his first lead against Clinton.
I think we've had enough of the Clintons in all fairness.
Once WikiLeaks started exposing secrets of the Democratic Party, Julian Assange became a hero to many on the right. Public opinion kind of flip-flopped.
WikiLeaks.
From the emails, we now know Hillary Clinton's campaign manager makes risotto, and also how the DNC squashed Bernie Sanders' campaign. One thing we don't know is who gave Assange the stolen emails in the first place.
Many leading Democrats say they suspect it was the Russians. They released an analysis from a private cybersecurity firm that had said it was the Russians.
But Assange claims
our source is not the Russian government, and it is not a state party.
So this is where we stand today. The public still doesn't know who provided the emails to WikiLeaks. Meanwhile, Assange is still running WikiLeaks and still releasing documents. In March 2017, he started publishing documents from the CIA's Center for Cyber Intelligence called Vault 7.
The CIA, the agency charged with finding and keeping our top secrets, can't keep its own secrets.
As long as Assange has a connection to the world, no government secret will be too far from exposure.
Julian Assange is still in the embassy. Maybe he'll leave, maybe he won't. Kind of regardless, his work has been done. He's changed the way people think about their governments, about their own secrets, about their own hackability, and really the world has changed because of him.
expose everything you won't admit. And action. This entire video is based on a true story. When I do like motivational speeches or even tell myself like, love yourself and you should love yourself.
This is Lily Singh. But to fans all over the world, she's the YouTube star Superwoman.
What if everyone's a girl, Superwoman? I know we can change the world for the better, one positive day at a time. My parents now know what I do. They didn't know what I did for a long time in the beginning of my career. I was just making videos in my room. They had no idea. Mom, Dad, have you seen my keys? I can't find them anywhere. Because you're always on phone. Until someone called them, like a family member from another part of Canada was like, Canada, is your daughter making videos? And my mom was like, I don't know, Lily, are you making videos?
Just making videos grew into an entire career. Today, Lily's YouTube channel has some 12 million subscribers, over 2 billion views, and guest stars like Michelle Obama, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, and Seth Rogen.
I think a lot of young girls are raised to believe that you're going to go to school and then graduate and then get married and then get a job and have kids.
And Lily was on that path, all the way through a psychology degree at York University in Toronto. But when she started thinking about a career,
I started to immensely panic and think something was wrong with me because I tried to figure out my life and it wasn't working in that straight line.
It was 2010, and YouTube was only 5 years old.
I thought nothing of YouTube. I was probably the last person in my circle of friends to discover YouTube. And I remember when I did, I thought, this is so strange. There's people making videos in their rooms, and other people are watching them.
So she figured, why not give it a shot?
I one day posted a video because I was sad, and I wanted to be creative and happy.
She didn't know how to edit video or write scripts, so she winged it.
It was so bad and so cringe. And my expectation was literally nothing. I was like, I'm gonna put this video up, a couple of my friends are gonna watch it, probably make fun of me, and that's gonna be the end of this. The second and third video came from, wait, 70 people watched my first one, can I get 80 to watch the next one?
She kept creating, she kept posting, and the viewers kept coming. Lily had found an audience.
A lot of the comments were, oh my God, there's a brown girl on YouTube.
More specifically, Indian. Lily's parents immigrated to Canada from India, and Lily was born and raised in Scarborough, near Toronto.
My home life was awesome. My parents, even though I portrayed them to be quite strict in my videos. Oi, Lily, where's the rest of your skirt, huh? I teach you like this, to walk around like this, showing everything to everyone? They actually aren't like that at all. They're pretty modern and pretty cool. Your dress is short. Don't know what for. And we're pretty lenient with me. I mean, I got away with a lot of things. I was a brat. I was a brat.
She had a different idea of what she wanted out of life than other kids. In a grade school graduation slideshow, her classmates said they wanted to be lawyers and doctors.
And then I came up and I was like, rapper.
Making out with your friends, man. But then you say that you hate hoes.
I could just feel my parents being like, why?
Because that's just not something women really did in the Singh family.
I know there was a ton of people that weren't happy about my birth being a female, so I think, and that's some real-ish, but it's a real thing. The best thing I could have done to prove to so many people that didn't want my mom to have a daughter was to become Superwoman. What up, everyone? It's your girl, Superwoman.
It was the name of Lily's favorite hip-hop song by Lil Mo featuring Fabulous.
I love the song so much because it was one of the only songs at the time that was an empowering female song, where Lil Mo's going on about, like, I will save guys with my superpowers, and I will save girls with my superpowers, and I am the Superwoman. I thought, this name that I've had for so long that empowered me when I was younger, I'm gonna make this my screen name. Maybe there should be a new series.
Superwoman didn't just burst onto the scene overnight with a viral video. It was a steady climb fueled by hard work.
The moment that I thought this is going somewhere and this could be a career was the first time I performed internationally. It was in India. And it was the first time where I was truly across the world and people knew my videos.
Singh has transformed herself from a bratty kid to an internet personality to a media mogul. She started a feature film, A Trip to Unicorn Island, in 2016. And her book, How to Be a Boss, hit the New York Times bestseller list in 2017 while she was on a 30-city international tour. Lily started out with the goal of getting millions of subscribers and financial security.
Hurry the hell up!
But after surpassing those goals, success has new meaning.
I've really come to terms with the fact that my definition of success is what's the best legacy I can leave behind. And it's not the number of views, the number of subscribers. It is the number of people that can say, this girl changed my life or changed something in my life positively.
CTE is often found in the brains of deceased athletes, military veterans, and others with a history of repetitive brain trauma. Hundreds have donated their brains to the VA Boston University Concussion Legacy Foundation Brain Bank.
This is a former NFL player who died in his early 70s, and this is a veteran who also died in his early 70s.
Dr. Ann McKee dissects these brains.
The hippocampus and the mammillary bodies are very important for memory. I can see that they're slightly affected.
McKee recently dissected the brain of former New England Patriots player Aaron Hernandez, who was convicted of murder and later committed suicide.
You'll see right away that the brain is showing signs of shrinkage. You can see the crevices in the brain that you can't see in the normal.
McKee says Hernandez's severe case of CTE impacted his decision-making, depression, and ability to control rage and aggression. Right now, she thinks we're underestimating how many people have CTE.
We were able to distinguish between CTE and controls and CTE and Alzheimer's disease. The next question is, can we do this in the blood, and can we do this in living people? And we aren't there yet with those answers.
But the need for a diagnosis in the living is motivating companies such as Quanterix in Lexington, Massachusetts, to work faster on technology that could diagnose concussions and CTE in as few as 30 minutes. Kevin Rosovsky is the CEO.
It's like a high-powered microscope. And so by doing that, we can see little biomarkers that you couldn't see before in the blood.
Quanterix received a grant from the NFL and just went public. Since then, its stock is up more than 40%. The company sells a machine called Simoa for $175,000 to other biotechs, hospitals, and researchers.
And for the first time in history, we're able to see brain health in blood, and that's a major breakthrough, and that's leading to less invasive testing, and we've already been able to see evidence of concussions, and there's the beginning evidence of being able to see the accumulated effect of concussions.
Quanterix is also trying to detect Alzheimer's disease, multiple sclerosis, and ALS. Rosovsky says he thinks diagnosing concussions will be easier than diagnosing CTE.
Diagnosing CT in the living probably is a couple years away. We're real excited to see the progress, but reducing some of that work into actual tests in a laboratory takes time. There's regulatory approvals. There's a lot of red tape that you have to go through.
Also in this race to diagnose CTE in the blood are Athlon Medical and Exosome Sciences. And New York's Mount Sinai Hospital is scanning for the disease in the living. But it's just one step in a series of questions for those with serious head trauma. There's still no cure for CTE.
Even if we had a great idea for a treatment, there's no way to test whether it's effective or not. So that's the enormous advance that we'll get if we can develop a biomarker for this disease.
In Boston, Ann Mostu, Bloomberg News.
Wine is a $300 billion global industry where one person's opinion can make fortunes or break them. That's because of this man, Robert Parker, and his newsletter, The Wine Advocate. For 3 decades, he dominated as the world's most influential wine critic. Now Parker's protege is building an empire of his own. Antonio Galloni runs Venice.
Antonio, tell me, what are you trying to build at Venice?
Well, at Venice, we started with the idea in 2013 of building a world-class platform. We have a database of about 250,000 professionally written reviews. On Delectable, we have 7 million user reviews. Through Delectable, we also have a partnership with Whole Foods and several other partnerships that we can't announce just yet. And when you put that all together, what we have is something that no other company in our space can even come close to.
Do you think of yourself as the next Parker?
Not at all.
Why?
Because Steve Jobs said you can't live your life trying to be somebody else. So he's one of my biggest influences, and I've never wanted to be a replica of somebody else because a replica is never as good as the original. Bob is a genius, fantastic, one of a kind. We're going to be something completely different, and I have no desire to be some version of somebody else.
Different in what way?
Every decision that I've made at this company is completely anathemic to what Bob did with his company. I want our writers to be partners. All of my senior people are locked into the company. They all have equity or they have a path to equity based on business results. That's something that we never had at Parker. Our benefits are world-class, and everything that we've done at Venice is completely different from that model. When Steve Tanzer, who is the most experienced active wine critic in America, wants to work with us, that says something. When Alessandro Masnaghetti, who's the best cartographer of vineyards, wants to work with us, that says something. When Neil Martin, who's a superstar wine critic with enormous experience in Bordeaux and Burgundy and the former lead critic at The Advocate, wants to come and be part of our team, that says something.
You make it sound like The Wine Advocate was a disaster as a company and a miserable experience as an employee.
No, it was great because I got to work with Bob Parker when he was at his prime, you know, and Bob was like a second father to me, and we talked on the phone all the time, and he gave me great advice.
Can anyone's palate dominate the wine criticism business the way Parker's did? And should anyone's palate dominate it the way his did?
I just think the world is very different today. You know, it's just a totally different world. It's probably not healthy to have a single person dominating the world.
It's not even wine criticism, it's the wine industry.
Yeah, that's probably not the healthiest thing in the world. But I think that there's just such an opportunity right now with social media and technology to reach such a massive number of people that I think it's possible that 1 or 2 people will actually have more influence than Bob Parker did, because they will, again, this goes back to your first question, not trying to be a version of somebody else. You see this in sports all the time. It's like, oh, well, nobody will ever beat this record. And then somebody comes along, you know, it's like tennis, Pete Sampras. Nobody's ever going to win as many Grand Slams. I have 2 guys who are ahead of that and 1 knocking on the door. And so I think a lot like that.
You're a former investment banker. How does that inform and influence what you're doing and what you've done?
My generation has had to deal with a lot more challenges. That's why I think we're actually much better poised for the future. My first job in finance, the first thing that happened was long-term capital, 1998. Then the tech bubble melted down. Then there was a mutual fund trading scandal. You know, that was all like within about 5 or 6 years. And these are the things that I had to deal with as a young executive. My peers who were 20 years older didn't know how to manage in crisis. They'd only seen Black Monday. They'd just been in a big bull market. It's very different. So I'm very lucky. People of my generation or a little bit younger have actually had to deal with a lot more crises. I think that's actually good for learning how to cope with challenges in business.
From the outside, it kind of looks like you're trying to demolish the house that Parker built, right? You left The Wine Advocate.
Yeah.
You merged with one of his chief rivals.
Yeah.
And you just hired his successor, Neil Martin.
Mm-hmm.
So are you?
I think what that says is that all the best people want to work at our company. And that's really what we strive to create starting in 2013. We wanted to create a world-class company that would attract the best-in-class talent, and not just on the content side, on the technology side, on the digital side, our office, and at every level, what we're trying to, we only hire superstars, and we're looking for those superstars.
In the world of professional wrestling, there's something called a swerve.
Hulk Hogan has betrayed WCW.
Some examples. These tag team partners are called babyfaces, or the good guys. Then one of them swerves when he super kicks his tag team partner in the head, quickly assuming the role of the bad guy, or what the wrestling world calls the heel.
Are you kidding? What a despicable act that was!
Or a match is almost lost when, what's that? The superstar wrestler appears out of nowhere sprinting down the aisle to save the match.
That's the Warriors music! It's the Ultimate Warrior!
That's a swerve. So it should go as no surprise that World Wrestling Entertainment, known as the WWE, the most popular brand of sports entertainment in the world, is prepared for any swerves that come their way. So here's the story of how the WWE learned to see the swerve coming. So I spoke to Bloomberg reporters Felix Gillette.
I'm a writer for Bloomberg News for the global business team.
And Kim Basine.
And I'm the U.S. luxury reporter at Bloomberg.
To find out exactly how the WWE is positioning itself for an all-out global invasion, which starts with a massive change to their lucrative pay-per-view model.
WWE basically pioneered the pay-per-view model on cable. I remember as a kid, when the pay-per-view events came up, all of our friends would scramble around and try and get one of the parents to pay for it.
But in 2014, they took a huge risk.
They saw a little bit sooner than some of the other entertainment brands that where this whole thing was moving was away from cable and satellite television and towards on-demand streaming video apps. They made this risky decision, in essence cannibalizing that pay-per-view model, which they had essentially built.
And after some early turbulence, it's working. Roughly 1.5 million people are paying $9.99 a month for the WWE app, making it the 5th most popular streaming OTT service. This adapt-or-die approach is in the WWE's DNA. Over the past 30 years, the company always seems to think 2 steps ahead. In the early 90s,
WWE was at its most threatened when Ted Turner took them on with WCW,
which stands for World Championship Wrestling. And back then, the WCW was winning the ratings war. So in order to compete with them,
WWE had changed its product from a family-friendly kind of cartoonish style to this really raw. That's why they called their show Raw. It was this raw style of wrestling.
With violent, outrageous, reality-inspired plot lines and aggressive personas.
From a 16-foot ladder!
And they won that fight against Ted Turner. And they bought WCW.
The early 2000s ushered in an era of testosterone-driven programming aimed at the red-blooded American male.
Bra and panties matches, and people smash each other over their head with like barbed wire bats and things like that.
Until 2015, when WWE fans started a hashtag Give Divas a Chance. Since then, WWE has hired 40 more female wrestlers, and that growing cast of female characters was part of a much larger plan.
They started to try to appeal to a broader set of people.
Let's attract more female fans. And after we've attracted more female fans, let's attract more international fans. They're broadening their base, and they're doing that in large part to make it more advertising friendly.
And not just friendly to advertisers.
They're trying to build up their fan base in China. They're trying to build up their fan base in Europe. They, already have a pretty good fan base in India.
India is a place where they already have an established wrestling culture.
Because of the gigantic Indian wrestler, the Great Khali. But there's still a lot of work to do. While the WWE set a revenue record in 2017, only 30% of it is coming from an overseas audience. And there's one person whose responsibility is to grow that number.
The buck eventually stops at Vince McMahon, no matter what's happening within WWE.
Yeah, he's a very controlling guy, and it's a very, very, very tightly scripted company.
And that goes all the way down the board to big stars' entrance music, and their outfits and things like that.
So with a CEO like McMahon always planning 2 moves ahead and an aggressive push into multiple international markets, a big issue is money.
It's hard to do all those things simultaneously without committing a huge amount of capital to it.
And that's where the WWE becomes an attractive company for buyers.
Potentially, one thing that could happen with WWE is they could benefit by being acquired acquired by a bigger technology or telecom company, an Amazon or Facebook or a 21st Century Fox.
So with a market cap of $2.8 billion, the advantage of owning 100% of their own content, and a rapid consolidation spreading throughout the entertainment industry, it looks like the WWE is well positioned, even if there are swerves ahead.
Our world is changing. Every day, it changes a little faster. Some changes are too small to see. Others, too big to handle. Sometimes, change feels slow. So slow, we don't even notice. Other times, it happens all at once, and we can't keep up. For our climate, change means many things. And between too small to see and too big to handle, there is a whole world of difference. The clock is ticking. This is Bloomberg Green.
Saving the seas. This week, the deep-sea diver who stopped writing the ocean's obituary to find a solution. Enric Sala tells us why the next 10 years matter most. And globalization needs to get greener. Shipping accounts for nearly an eighth of all transport emissions. How can the industry clean up its act? Plus, protecting coastlines comes at a huge environmental cost. But one Israeli startup found a way to keep the sea out and the animals in. From London, I'm Anne-Marie Hordern, and this is Bloomberg Green. After more than a decade of studying the ocean as an academic, Enric Sala realized he was writing the ocean's obituary. He quit his job and became a full-time conservationist. As an in-house explorer for National Geographic, he's clocked more than 5,000 open water dives. He's also founded Pristine Seas, a project that combines exploration, research, and media to lobby countries to protect their oceans. To date, it has helped create marine reserves equivalent to half the size of Canada. I spoke to him about his mission and why it's so urgent.
The state of the world's oceans is really bad. We have lost 90% of the large fish in the ocean. Sharks, groupers, cod, tuna. More than half of the fish stocks are overfished, which means that we are taking them out of the water faster than they can reproduce. More than half of the ocean is affected by industrial fishing, and global warming is killing coral reefs all around the world. The ocean is in a trajectory of decline.
Can you just visualize for our viewers who never get to see the kind of things you are able to see, what an ocean and healthy ecosystem looks like versus one that's next to a bustling economic and industrialized area?
Coral reefs in the United States, in the Florida Keys, are down to only 2% of what they used to be. Before, 80 to 90% of the bottom on a coral reef in the Caribbean was covered by live coral. Now, Florida Keys have only 2%. The average in the Caribbean is about 5% of the bottom covered by live coral. The rest is covered by slime and seaweed. And most of the fish you can see are this big. And it is very, very rare that if you jump into any place in the Caribbean at random, you see a shark. It's very, very rare. Now, let's go to Millennium Atoll, for example. An atoll that is uninhabited and fished south of the equator in the Central Pacific, belongs to the Republic of Kiribati. 2009, we conducted the first underwater expedition to this island, and I still remember the first time. Jumped over the side of the boat, and as soon as the bubbles cleared, I was surrounded by 15 gray reef sharks. After a couple minutes, the sharks decided that we were boring, and they went back to do their thing. And you look down, 90% of the seafloor is covered by thriving coral, and it's full of fish, and a sea turtle comes by. Now, this abundance that we rarely see anywhere except in well-managed marine reserves. This is what the ocean used to be like, and this is what we have learned from going to these pristine places.
And you write in your book that you're writing the obituary of ocean life. What's the cure?
The cure is doing less harm. Basically, there are three things that we are doing to the ocean. One is we are taking fish out of the water faster than they can reproduce. Two, we are turning the ocean warmer and more acidic because of man-made climate change. And three, we are throwing in everything that we don't want, our waste and our plastic. We need basically to reverse these trends.
Does this mean that a lot of this falls to governments and their policies?
That's a big part of it, because it is governments that regulate fishing and mineral extraction and oil extraction. It is governments that have the legal authority to create large marine reserves in the ocean. But also, local communities have an important role to play, because some of the most successful protected areas in the ocean are community-led and community-managed marine reserves. So when the fish come back, the divers come in. And that creates huge economic opportunities through ecotourism. These areas that are managed by communities are very successful because the communities have a vested interest in having as many fish as possible inside them so they can enjoy the benefits.
What from the pandemic has changed your view when it comes to protection of the environment?
Nature has given us a very strong signal of how fast it can recover if we just give it space. Everybody was fascinated by all these videos of the whales and the dolphins coming into marinas, and mountain lions on the streets of Santiago in Chile, wild goats in the UK. Nature has this extraordinary ability to bounce back if we just give it space. This is why we need to protect at least 30% of the planet by 2030.
How do healthy marine ecosystems help in the fight against climate change, though?
Most people see the ocean as a victim of climate change, but the ocean can also be a solution, because we know that the more life that is in the ocean, like big fish and big whales, the more these organisms help to make the ocean productive and absorb more CO2. The kelp forest, seagrass beds, all of these are important ecosystems in the ocean that are similar to the forest on the land, that capture a lot of our carbon pollutions.
What are you most excited about in your field?
We have 10 years to fix this problem. Global fisheries catch is going down, stocks are collapsing. Business as usual means that by 2050, 90% of the coral reefs are gone, that most commercial fisheries have collapsed. That affects food security, that affects a migration of people. We have 10 years to get to peak greenhouse gas emissions and then go carbon neutral by 2050. And we have 10 years to protect at least 30% of the ocean so we can restore much of this health and productivity, not just for saving biodiversity, but also saving our life support system. We are not talking about something that is apart from us. We are not apart from nature. We are a part of nature. So these 10 years are probably the most critical in the history of humanity.
The most accurate measurements of changing oceans will come from space. While Enric Sala explores what lies beneath, a new satellite is giving us data from above.
We'll learn more about our oceans and climate change, but from space. A new satellite's been launched from California. Its mission: track the accelerating rise of sea levels.
Well, the main instruments on board include a dual-frequency radar altimeter. And this is the primary instrument of the mission, and that's the one that's measuring sea surface height, significant wave height, and wind speed over the ocean. And from those measurements, we can actually have the superb measurements that we expect of sea level rise.
Data gathered from Sentinel-6 will be used alongside information from other satellites to build as complete a picture of the oceans as possible.
With a long record, we can precisely measure the acceleration. We eventually can detect new regime, tipping points. For example, if there is a runaway in the melting of Greenland or Antarctica, sea level will record this runaway change because it is an integrator of all changes that are occurring in the climate system. So we will be able to see some change, big change in the global climate.
The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration expects that sea level rise will increasingly threaten U.S. coastlines. One example, the southern tip of Manhattan is expected to flood 20 to 40 times a year by 2030.
11 of the 15 largest megacities are located at the coast, and this number will double. The number of people living in coastal area will double by 2060. So, knowing how much sea level is rising at the coast and how much it will rise in the future in coastal areas is as obvious. It's obviously a major goal for human beings.
Coming up, from sales to steam to oil, the shipping industry is no stranger to change. But how will it navigate the next transition? This is Bloomberg Green. From Bloomberg's European headquarters in London, I'm Anne-Marie Hordern. This is Bloomberg Green. Now, for your roundup of this week's latest climate news, Jennifer Zabazaja has your Green in Brief.
Here's the climate news you need to know. Deforestation of the world's largest rainforest has hit a 12-year high. More than 4,000 square miles of the Amazon rainforest was destroyed in 2020. That's a 9.5% increase from a year earlier. Government data shows that destruction has soared since President Jair Bolsonaro took office and weakened environmental enforcement. The Amazon is home to millions of species and plants and is critical in the fight against climate change. Bitcoin is hitting all-time highs, but at what cost to the environment? The cryptocurrency is energy intensive, and there are concerns if it becomes mainstream. According to MIT, back in 2018, Bitcoin's carbon footprint was almost as big as Portugal's. Want to get better at tackling climate change? We'll hire more women. That's according to Bloomberg New Energy Finance. Firms with 30% or more women in top jobs tend to perform better when it comes to the environment and are more likely to set clear climate goals. Shopping online is more popular than ever now, but the price of convenience is measured in CO2, and more deliveries means more fuel burned and more packaging wasted. So what can companies do? Well, many are becoming more efficient and sourcing more clean energy for their data centers and warehouses. And England's farmers will be paid to go green after Brexit. As European subsidies are phased out, they'll get new money to encourage them to produce healthy, sustainable food. Poor farming practices are one of the leading drivers of water pollution and the loss of biodiversity. I'm Jennifer Zabazaja in New York. Anne-Marie, back to you.
The shipping industry is more than just the grease on the wheels of globalization. It's its chief enabler. 11 billion tons of goods are transported by ship each year, the biggest contributors being 2 billion tons of oil, 1 billion tons of iron ore, and 350 million tons of grain. According to the International Chamber of Shipping, 80% of Europe's imports and exports happen over the seas. And for such a vast industry, it also contributes its fair share of emissions. Shipping makes up 12% of global transport energy consumption. So how does it clean up its act? Earlier, I caught up with Bloomberg Green reporter Laura Milan about just how big of a challenge this is going to be for the industry.
One of the main issues is size. So about 90% of the world's cargo is moved by ships. So obviously changing such a huge industry is not going to be fast and it's not going to be easy. The second issue has to do with technology. So ships obviously travel for many days at sea. It's not as easy for them to refuel as it would be for a car, for example, going on a road. And the sector still hasn't found a technology that's economically viable and that's zero emissions and equivalent to the electric batteries for cars, for example.
But actions are being put in place to make the industry a bit more environmentally friendly. Walk us through those steps that they're taking.
That's it. So there's a first step that would involve using low emission fuels or biofuels that would significantly reduce the existing emissions. And then at a regulatory level, when it comes to the policy and the governments, there are steps being made as well. I would say that the most significant ones come from the European Union, which started to track emissions a few years ago and is now looking to include shipping emissions in the emissions trading system. So that would significantly reduce and help calculate the emissions from the shipping industry. Now, China is taking similar steps. So at the moment, regions need to report shipping emissions to the central government. And finally, we have the International Maritime Organization with a pledge to reduce shipping emissions by 50% in 2050. Now, we must say that that pledge has been considered insufficient by environmental groups, but at least some steps are being taken.
So to get to 2050, the industry obviously is going to need to start tapping some new technologies. What new technologies are you seeing being introduced into the shipping industry?
So we have seen pilot technologies being developed for years now, but what's interesting about this current moment is that we're seeing big players invest in these technologies that are not yet economically viable, but that one day might be. So for example, we are seeing earlier this year, the world's largest agricultural commodities trader, Cargill, saying they will invest in attaching sails to their ships so they can make any technology that they run their ships on more efficient. Similarly, we have seen a spin-off of Airbus, the aeronautics company, developing a similar application with kites. We have been following also developments in hydrogen. So at the moment, hydrogen fuel seems like a good option, a possible option when it has been developed and when it becomes economically viable. And we have Vestas, for example, the world's largest turbine maker, developing some ships that will be able to run on hydrogen in the near future.
Coming up, rising sea levels means humans need to get creative when it comes to coastal defenses. But how do we protect both ourselves and the environment? One Israeli startup may have the answer. That's coming up next. This is Bloomberg Green. In London, I'm Anne-Marie Hordern. This is Bloomberg Green. After water, what's the resource that humans use the most? It's concrete, 3 tons a year for every person on the planet. And engineers estimate it's used twice as much as all other building materials combined. And it comes with a huge environmental cost. Concrete, not just in cities, it's a common feature on our coastlines too. And that's taking a toll on biodiversity. But one Israeli startup has found a way of making sea defenses stronger and encouraging life to thrive.
If you take a look at concrete structures like breakwaters or seawalls, the water around them is often clear. That's not actually a good thing, because it means there's no life. Marine species are actually most abundant in coastal areas, but it's also where us humans prefer to live too. So when we build here, we drive away marine life.
The concrete in the marine world has a lot of additives, a lot of chemicals, and some of those materials are actually leaching out, and they're actually prohibiting marine life to thrive. If we keep developing without any regards to natural communities, there is a tilting point from which beyond we cannot really go back.
In the coastal city of Tel Aviv, an Israeli startup wants to revolutionize our urban coastlines. Their sea defenses are transforming lifeless man-made structures into teeming ecosystems. They do this by replacing standard concrete with their own special cement formulas.
As opposed to regular cement-based concrete, e-concrete includes certain elements that enhance the growth of marine flora and fauna of plants and animals. Our admix, which is kind of our secret sauce, is basically kind of sealing the concrete, making it less aggressive for the marine environment. That once we add it, we enable life to flourish.
In the lab, the team run tests to identify what mixes will work best for marine life.
So we take really ice cube sized concrete slabs of different compositions, and we put larvae, 20, 30, 50. We need to have a lot of replicates. We're geeky scientists, so we have to have a lot of replication and controls. And then within a few days or just a few weeks, we can get an answer on their preference. So obviously, if they die, they have a very low tolerance to that specific concrete mix design. And if they thrive or they flourish, we can quantify that very quickly.
E-concrete says it typically sees double the biodiversity of regular grey concrete. From fish and sea caterpillars on their armour blocks to crabs on these tidal pools that sit on the shoreline.
This unit holds water during the low tide, so it's always moist, and therefore it has a very comfortable habitat for crabs and sea anemones and sea stars, etc. These pools have been here for less than 3 months, and this is already what you can see. It's covered with life. See the rock around it, which has been here for probably 10, 20, maybe even more years, only has a thin layer of green algae, and that's it.
As well as the composition of the cement mix, E-concrete designs its products specifically to the marine environment it will be deployed, to create niches for endangered species, or to develop nurseries like these oyster beds. The final part of the equation is creating complex surface textures to mimic natural rock or coral, an environment that helps anchor young organisms.
When concrete elements are being cast, the typical goal is to have a very slick surface, very, very smooth. The idea is to get the water to flow right across it. When we're designing e-concrete with a rough surface, we want to do the complete opposite. We want to slow the water when they are crossing the structure so that the larvae can actually adhere and attach to the surface.
E-concrete has to offer its clients more than just ecological credentials. Over time, they've discovered that creating hospitable habitats for marine life adds another advantage, one that is surely hard to ignore.
We've seen evidence to the fact that the growth of the organisms on the concrete create kind of a layer of defense. Just the addition of weight, we can actually gain stability and strength over time.
This is let's say the unit when we put it in the water. And this is after a year in the water. And what you can see here is all the oysters are completely covering it. We designed the units so they can withstand the forces and perform in terms of structural performance, but they can also be a backbone for ecological enhancement.
The company tests its miniature designs in tanks full of real seawater, rocks, plants, and animal life from around the world.
What we're looking for is the accumulation of calcium carbonate on the surface of the concrete of different mixes and different designs. This is the process that we call biogenic buildup. So with time, we get a buildup of calcium carbonate that is sourced from marine organisms on the surface of the concrete. And we actually encapsulate the concrete with a natural rock. So when the organism die, in the case of a coral, it will die, and then another coral will sit on it, and that's how a reef is growing.
The hope that our man-made structures could become stronger over time also means better economics. The
The units require less maintenance and could therefore stay in the water for longer. E-concrete, though, is just a few years old, so it needs more time to really quantify the longevity of its products. But the company are certain their products are better for the environment, and not just in terms of improving biodiversity.
We're kind of trying to offset some of that immense carbon footprint of the concrete industry.
Construction is responsible for about 11% of global carbon emissions. By adding a biological crust to their products, e-concrete prevents some CO2 from being released into the atmosphere.
For every kilogram of calcium carbonate being created by those marine organisms, we're offsetting 120 grams of CO2. So think about building a port infrastructure or a city waterfront that is an active carbon sink. I think that's a great advantage of the technology.
That does it for this week, but let's keep the conversation going on Twitter. Follow us at Climate. I'm Anne-Marie Hordern, and this is Bloomberg Green.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Bloomberg Quick Takes Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
Yes, indeed. This is Bloomberg Business Week, live from our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio, streaming on YouTube. It is Tuesday, January 12th.
It is.
It is. How you feeling?
I'm feeling like it's a long week, Carol.
You look like you could at least use some sleep a little bit. You got the sleepy eyes. I say it with love.
I know. It does feel like a long week already.
Well, and I have to say, it's kind of a bit of a holding pattern on Wall Street. I think people are already exhausted by the news flow. We've got a lot to cover, and I kind of was tying things together because I feel like we've got a little bit of a theme of branding, what it means for Spotify, a Capitol Hill rioter. That is an amazing story. President Trump, branding, and we've got a gold bug whose call was spot on last year. So I'm going to try and tie
I like it.
together.
You know, Carol, it works.
All right, you're a good man. All right, let's first get a check on today's trading day because, you know, Charlie, I'm calling the trade meh.
You know what? Wakey, guys. Come on. It's Tuesday already, and it has not been that crazy a week as of right now. Let me begin with gold. We've got the gold bug coming up right now. Gold, precious metal up $4 the ounce at $18.47. That is a gain of 0.2%. Look at the 10-year. Rise and shine up 1.14% right now. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ turning around. It has been a choppy day, but right now the S&P is up 38.03, higher by 0.1%. The Dow up 6 60. That is a gain of 0.2%. NASDAQ up 42, up by 0.3%. We've got crude oil surging 1.6%, 53 handle now on crude, 53.07 up 82 cents. WTI 56.53, Brent crude 56.53 again. We've got WTI at 53.09 a barrel. Stocks mixed. Benchmark Treasury note yields lingering at 10-month highs. Investors continue to mull the prospects of the economic recovery and a vaccine rollout. That is the latest from the news desk. Back to you guys.
All right. I'm awake, Charlie Pellet. You say it, I do it.
You know, I try. This is exciting stuff today. It really is.
It is exciting, but it's a little bit calmer, but you're right. Let's see what happens. Let's set the Business Week agenda. Dave Wilson is with us. We've got lots to get to. He's going to set, though, the theme and what's going on Wall Street. He's our stocks editor at Bloomberg News. Dave Wilson, but the trade, I do feel like, investors trying to figure out, do we get an economic recovery? When do we get it? Vaccine rollout. We know the vaccine's here, but again, when do we get it? Right, Tim? Don't you feel like that's kind of where we are?
Yeah, I think that's where we are, and I think we're seeing some of that data reflected in what we're seeing in markets today. Dave, what do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's part of the argument. The other part is we're kind of in the calm before the earnings storm. Let's not forget, fourth quarter results start arriving this week from the S&P 500. Thursday, actually, we get the first figures, Delta Airlines, First Republic, BlackRock, and then Friday,
the big
when
banks,
things really start to heat up. Exactly, with the banks. Citigroup, JP Morgan Chase, and Wells Fargo all due to reports. That's three of the four biggest U.S. banks right there. So there's a lot to anticipate, especially because, you look at the estimates that we've compiled for the S&P 500. Analysts were figuring the fourth quarter was another down quarter, but this year you're talking recovery, something like a 22% increase in profits. So what we'll hear from companies over the next few weeks will kind of set up how realistic the projections are as we go into 2021 and anticipated economic recovery and anticipate that the coronavirus vaccine will help get things back to what passes for normal. So, there's a lot to look forward to.
As far as data goes, we're seeing crude oil reaching a 10-month high. We are seeing, look at this, yields are also lingering at 10-month highs right now. What's the story there?
Well, I mean, you look at energy stocks, they're the best performers among the 11 main industry groups in the S&P 500.
Up more than 3%, Dave.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're talking about a group that, would benefit from an economic recovery, you can certainly point to energy in that regard, especially because you have to consider it's not just the oil and gas producers in that index, it's also the alternative energy companies. There's been a real focus on that area over the past several weeks. So, that's part of it. And in terms of what's going on with treasuries, I just put out a chart that one of my colleagues compiled, our colleague, that looked at the fact that yields have been up on the 10-year notes 7 days in a row, and that's only happened like a half a dozen times since 1990. So that's going to bear watching whether the streak goes on. As you want to talk streaks, Tesla's back higher after having fallen yesterday for the first time since December 22nd. Its longest winning streak ever since going public in 2010. So, that sort of reverted to form at least.
Yeah, I love that. It's just, it goes down a little bit and then it goes up again. Like, I'm just, unless you start to really find problems with the fundamental story, I think it's going to be hard, essentially, to get investors to back away.
You think so?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously didn't call this most recent surge, but if you think about where we were with Tesla just a few years ago, I mean, this is a company that a few years ago people were wondering, hey, are they going to run out of cash? Do they have enough cash to finish the year?
And now they've got plenty of cash, Dave.
Yeah.
$800 billion plus market value, though, when you consider the company's made
that's a little steep.
Yeah.
All right, I feel a little humbled all of a sudden.
Making cars. I haven't gone back and run the numbers.
But is it a car or is it technology? Or as somebody tweeted at me, is it a battery company? And you need to look at,
That's been the argument for years from Tesla bulls. Hey, this is so much more than a car company. Is it an energy company?
He's doing a lot of other things, too.
Yeah, he is.
It's all part of the mix, but, the challenge is figuring out what it really is and what is it going to be worth over time, because ultimately when you're paying 376 times estimated
just looking at that, Dave. Yeah. All right. And there's only about 6% in terms of the percentage of float that is being shorted right now. So it's not like there's a lot of folks shorting it.
I think some could say divorced from reality.
Maybe.
Or fundamentals.
Maybe.
And betting against
Maybe.
Tesla
Maybe.
has been such a bad trade for so long that you can understand why the numbers are so low. I mean, I'm sure there are a few short sellers that really got burned.
Oh, there are.
We know there are.
Yeah.
The capitulation, too, of everybody always like, all right, I was wrong. It shouldn't be a sell. That does make me a little
Don't forget,
nervous.
Elon Musk sold shorts that were branded Tesla for the Tesla shorts.
I know. That was actually very clever. Thank you very much.
More so than the flamethrowers.
Tongue in cheek. Very funny. Dave Wilson will be back a little bit later on. Dave, thank you so much. Let's talk a little bit about what we got coming up. There's a lot of stories out there. And I did mean it when we talked about kind of a theme of branding, because we're going to talk about the Trump brand, because you are seeing it's not quite rats fleeing a sinking ship, but you do have a lot of companies backing away, the PGA backing away from using Trump, golf courses. You're just seeing all of a sudden companies, partners who would work with him over the last 4 years for the most part, all of a sudden now saying, okay, we're backing away.
It's not just the president who is seen as this. And we're going to explore that with Max Abelson, who has just a fantastic story out on this today. Trump sparks a crisis for his empire just before returning to it. But also the editor of Forbes warned companies that might hire press secretaries from the Trump administration, people from the Trump administration saying, hey, this is the wrong message to be sending. Because so often what happens to people who work in an administration is they leave to go to the private sector and they make a ton of money. But what is the message this Forbes editor says if you hire somebody from the Trump administration, you spent so much time lying?
Right, exactly. So, are you now lying about the new company that you're working with and that brand? Right? It begs the question. Deutsche Bank Signature also cutting ties, so that's something that we're following as well. There's something that caught my attention, whistleblowing soaring to a record with Americans working from home. Regulators, Tim, apparently have been flooded with tips on corporate wrongdoing. And so I just thought that was interesting. I guess people working at home and they feel like, I don't know.
Maybe feel a little less pressure without the watchful eye of their colleagues all around them.
Right. They're not at the water cooler and they're worried people looking over their shoulder or anything, or at the copier. It's different. It's weird.
That is weird.
It's like a story I don't know.
Maybe they feel like less of a connection to their company, too.
Yeah.
There's a lot of psychology at play there.
Yeah, totally. All right, so lots to cover over the next couple of hours. Let's do the Bloomberg Business Week Bite of the Day. It's one number that tells a lot. Today's number, nice and round, 70,000. Twitter has permanently suspended more than 70,000 accounts dedicated to sharing QAnon-associated conspiracy theory content and ratcheted up its enforcement in the wake of the Washington, D.C. riot last week. As part of its latest measures, follower counts for some users may change by as much as thousands. Company warning against the sharing of QAnon material in the summer and said accounts that tweet or retweet it will continue to have limited visibility across search replies and on timelines and are prohibited from being recommended to others by Twitter. It's a different world, social media.
It is.
World.
A lot of people complaining that they lost followers. I didn't lose any followers.
Me neither. I think I might have gained a few. All right, let's get a check on world and national news. For that, let's head on over to D.C. and Nancy Lyons. Hey, Nancy.
Hey, Carol. President Trump taking no responsibility for the violent insurrection at the Capitol. He says his remarks to the crowd were totally appropriate. He's also addressed moves by Democrats in Congress to remove him from office.
On the impeachment, it's really a continuation of the greatest witch hunt in the history of politics. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. This impeachment is causing tremendous anger, and you're doing it, and it's really a terrible thing that they're doing.
Trump spoke before leaving for Alamo, Texas, to see a section of the border wall. The House Rules Committee has been debating a resolution requesting Vice President Mike Pence invoke the 25th Amendment and take President Trump out of office. The move was held up yesterday by one Republican congressman under House rules, which set up a full vote on the issue today. Republicans argue it's time to unite. That's when Committee Chair James McGovern, a Democrat, asked his Republican colleague Jim Jordan whether he would admit that Joe Biden won the election fair and square. Jordan admitted that Biden did win, but said he still has issues. The Trump administration is changing its approach to vaccinating Americans, now urging states to widen availability to anyone older than 65. HHS Secretary Alex Azar says he does not want second doses held back.
We are releasing the entire supply we have for order by states, rather than holding second doses in physical reserve.
The shift matches the approach announced by President-elect Joe Biden. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Massar, along with Quick Take's Tim Stenovic, my co-host, and we're looking at some of the virus stories. This one caught my attention because I have a bunch of family in Arizona. Arizona's setting a death record. Yeah, not always good. I know you have a lot of family out West Coast, too.
California, Colorado, Washington. It's hard to find good news when you look around the country. But one thing we are seeing happen in real time is public health officials and also government officials start to think differently about the way they're distributing the vaccine. And you can see it differ by state, too, which is part of the struggle of the vaccine rollout because there is no sort of federal governing body that is handling this.
Right.
But it also allows states to do what they want. And we're seeing here a big change with the way that New York State is approaching vaccine delivery.
Exactly. They're apparently going to lower the vaccine age. They're talking about lowering its vaccine age from 75 to 65 following the change in guidance. This was after the Trump administration came out and urged states to expand access to vaccines, including making them available to anyone over 65. But again, New York looking to lower it. They're also going to use Citi Field, home of the Mets, as a mass vaccination site starting the week of January 25th. This coming from New York City's Mayor Bill de Blasio. This is where I think, again, no playbook, right? So we're trying to figure it out. And I feel like New York, we were the epicenter back in the spring. And as we learned how to do things, right, we kind of spread the knowledge, spread the equipment. And I think
Governor Cuomo wrote a book.
Right, exactly. Thank you very much. And, but I also think in terms of rolling out the vaccine, I do hope there starts to be like, hey, this is what worked in our state. Maybe you want to think about that. And I'm hoping that that's what's going to catch on.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. It's something that I asked Drew Armstrong earlier today on Quick Take. Drew. And right now, it's sort of too soon to see where things are working and where things aren't working.
Yeah.
For example, North Dakota, South Dakota, West Virginia, it's working pretty well as far as vaccine distribution goes, but so is Connecticut.
Right.
So there's like really difficult similarities there. Drew was funny. He said the only similarities that the Dakotas have with Connecticut is that they're square.
I want to ask you something. I'll do it in the break, and then maybe we'll bring it into our conversation. All right, you're listening to Bloomberg.
updates, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We begin with a developing story headline from the Bloomberg Professional Service. The UK plans to host a virtual G7 leaders meeting in February. People familiar with the situation saying the UK is aiming to host an in-person G7 summit in June. So again, plans for a virtual G7 meeting in February. Stocks trading mixed. Benchmark Treasury note yields lingering at 10-month highs as investors mull the prospects of the economic recovery and vaccine rollout. Bottom line, though, U.S. stocks are trading a little change. Right now, though, actually, we've got the S&P up 3 at 38.03, a gain of about 0.1%. Dow Industrials up 77 now, higher by 0.3%. Best level of the day, the Dow had been up 91. We've got NASDAQ up 34 for the NASDAQ Composite Index, a gain there of 0.3%. Interestingly, NASDAQ 100 Index is down little change, but lower by less than 0.1%. Transport's up 1.1%. Russell 2000 keeps on going, up another 1.4%. 10-year up 3/32, 10-year yield 1.13% right now. Gold up 0.5%, 18.52 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.8%, up 93 cents the barrel to 53.18. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You're listening to Bloomberg Business. We Carol Massar along with Tim Stenovic. So we mentioned some of the virus headlines. The Trump administration urging states, as we mentioned, to expand access to vaccines. This is the World Health Organization team looking into the origins of the pandemic. They are set to arrive in China. Global virus cases, Tim, 91 million, topping 91 million. Deaths surpassing 1.94 million. Vaccines given out, more than 29 million shots given worldwide.
Cannot come soon enough, the vaccine for widespread vaccination, I should say.
Exactly, and fingers crossed that it continues to pick up speed. Back with us is Dr. Sandro Galea. He's Dean and Professor at Boston University School of Public Health, author of Pained, Uncomfortable Conversations About the Public's Health. He joins us once again on the phone from Boston. Dr. Galea, nice to have you here. Happy New Year. How are you? Tell me kind of what's going on in your world from an academic level as well as from what you're seeing on the vaccine and COVID.
Happy New Year, Carol, and Happy New Year, Tim. I am, as we've discussed on the show before, I am fortunately well, and my family is well, and these are difficult times. I find myself entering the new year with an equal mix of trepidation and hope. And on any given day, I try to make sure that hope overtakes trepidation. Now, why trepidation? Well, we have a lot of challenges we're still facing as a country, separate and apart from the politics that we are all living through. COVID remains a really important problem. The economy, which is as a result of COVID, remains an important problem. And all of this, as we've discussed, is on a foundation of structural issues like racism that we have been dealing with as a country for a long time. So I think those things all give me trepidation.
All of a sudden, I want you for an hour. I'm just going to tell you. Sandra, let me ask you something, though. What we saw last week, obviously the dysfunction that I think it's safe to say has been caused by our president, whether it's internally within the government and then more broadly across society. How do you think that has hindered, in some ways, the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine?
I think enormously. I don't think we can overstate how much lack of federal leadership has hindered our response to COVID. We've vaccinated about 9 million people in the country right now, and if we keep vaccinating at this rate, it will take us 2 years before we vaccinate the whole country, which of course is unacceptable. And remember, this is in the context of a lot of promises that had been made by the executive branch. So politics has been an integral part of the COVID story right from the beginning. It has been a part of the story as to why we separated from WHO. It's been part of the story why half the country doesn't seem to believe that COVID is a real thing. It's been part of the story as to why we do or don't wear masks. And I think it's a real reminder that, Rudolf Virchow, one of the fathers of microbiology, said that medicine is politics on a grand scale. And we've never seen that more clearly than we have in 2020.
I'm wondering about the rollout of vaccine right now. Here we are, we're almost exactly a month into when that first shot was given. What have we learned about the right way to give people the vaccine? And I mean, age-wise, profession-wise, what is the right approach?
Well, fundamentally, our priorities are right. And by that, I mean that we are prioritizing healthcare workers and people at highest risk. And those are people of the older age groups and people with underlying conditions. So I think all of that, we have the concepts correct. I think where we're stumbling is really at the implementation and the pragmatics. So a couple of things that we've learned. Number one is that the guidelines are being interpreted very strictly in clinics and hospitals and nursing homes, which means that a lot of vaccine is going unused because there are not enough people in that risk category to get the vaccine in that particular spot. And that clearly needs to be loosened. And number two, we are realizing that the vaccine distribution is going through these formal channels of hospitals and nursing homes, and it's not happening fast enough to get to the people who are at high risk, people over a certain age and people with underlying conditions. And there are states that have done well. We shouldn't forget that. For example, West Virginia had vaccinated everybody in its assisted living facilities, nursing homes, before Christmas, which is quite remarkable. And they did that by contracting out to CVS and Walgreens. Other states have taken approaches that are right now controversial. For example, Florida creating large vaccination sites for people over the age of 65. But ultimately, the right answer has to be determined state by state. But it's pretty clear to me that we need to make sure that the vaccine is available very, very quickly with criteria that are clear about who's prioritized, but flexible enough to make sure that the vaccine can be delivered quickly in a particular context.
We are also seeing a little bit of hesitancy from healthcare workers. The reporting shows that it's not necessarily doctors, but different people who work at long-term care facilities and at hospitals as well. What's the right messaging to make sure that they're fully informed on why they should get the vaccine?
I think the messaging is simple, that the vaccine is safe, it's effective, and fundamentally doesn't just help the person who takes them, it helps the rest of us. Because remember, what we're trying to achieve is collective immunity. So Tim, your being vaccinated helps me, my being vaccinated helps Carol. And I think there is a personal need to take the vaccine to make sure that we protect ourselves, but also a collective obligation to take the vaccine to improve our collective immunity. And I think that message, I suppose, go back to where I started, Carol, with my mix of trepidation and hope. Mm-hmm. My hope is that in the next few weeks, that common sense is going to prevail, that enough people will recognize that we are dealing with a safe, effective vaccine to help us end a really terrible pandemic that has paralyzed the world, and we're going to see much less of that hesitancy in weeks going forward.
And it goes to community, like thinking about your community. It's not just yourself. But I like this whole idea of hope and trepidation in terms of what you're thinking. I can see, Tim, you were thinking about something.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, this is the conversation we have every day, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's kind of that's it.
That's it until we're all back to normal.
Yeah. All right. We're going to continue with Dr. Sandra Galea, a really smart voice for us on the pandemic. Boston University School of Public Health Dean. Back in a moment.
Broadcasting live to New York, Bloomberg 1130. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 1061. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. It's Tuesday. Carol Master along with Tim Stenovic in our Interactive Brokers studio. We're going to get back to the Dean of Boston University School of Public Health, friend of the show, Dr. Sandro Galea. We're going to continue talking about COVID-19 and the vaccine, including a story. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but it's the second most read on the Bloomberg. You brought it to my attention, Tim.
Yeah, and it speaks to hesitancy about the vaccine, and this is not going to help at all.
No, exactly. All right, we'll get to that in just a moment. First up, back to Charlie Pellet, your top business stories. What do you got, Charlie?
What I got is earnings after the bell coming up. KB Home. We'll have that for you as that breaks right here on Bloomberg Radio, up 0.8% right now on shares of the home builder. Stocks trading higher right now. Benchmark Treasury note yields lingering at 10-month highs as investors mull the prospects of the economic recovery and the vaccine rollout, a topic we're discussing right here on Bloomberg Business Week. Right to the numbers now, with the S&P advancing 5 to 3804, up by 0.1%. Best level of the day, we had the S&P up 11, up by just about 0.3%. The Dow up 68, up 0.2 right now. NASDAQ up 41 for the NASDAQ Composite Index, up 0.3%. NASDAQ 100 Index just turning around, up now by 0.1%. Dow Transports up 1.4%. Russell 2000 up by 1.5%. 10-year up 3/30 seconds. 10-year yield 1.13% now. Gold is up $12 the ounce, up 0.7% at $18.56. And West Texas Intermediate Crude 53.20 for a barrel of WTI, up today by 1.8%. The Trump administration is encouraging states to widen access to COVID-19 vaccines as part of an effort to speed up a stumbling immunization campaign. Health officials are pushing states to expand the shots availability to anyone older than 65, regardless of underlying conditions. The speed up is welcome news for Dr. Amish Adalja, senior scholar at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security.
We have to change the entire pace of how we're vaccinating. We have to start to bring in mass vaccinations. We've got to find ways to be innovative with the constraints that we know that there's a supply chain issue, there's a cold chain issue, there's the fact that you have to have people wait 15 minutes after they've been vaccinated in order to make sure they don't have an allergic reaction. We've got to find a better way to do that. And at the same time, we still have to continue to test, trace, and isolate. And mass testing, getting people to use the home test, all of that still has to be going on at the same time as we're vaccinating.
And, of course, we'll have more on the topic coming up in just a moment. And a reminder, the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health is supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Sheldon Adelson, who built the largest casino company in the world and used his wealth to support Republican candidates and groups, has died. Sheldon Adelson was 87. Recapping, U.S. stocks, they are trading higher. S&P 500 index up 4 now, up 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much, Charlie. Appreciate it. Let's get right back to Dr. Sandro Galea. He's Dean and Professor at Boston University School of Public Health, author of Pained, Uncomfortable Conversations about the Public's Health. I do want to ask you, and I have to say, Dr. Galea, Tim and I kind of went back and forth, do we want to bring this up? But it is the second most read story on the Bloomberg. It's from the New York Times, and it talks about a Florida physician who developed an unusual blood disorder shortly after he received the Pfizer vaccine. Not yet known if the shot is linked to the illness, and he did die from an unusually severe blood disorder 16 days after receiving that vaccine. Help me out here. How are we to be smart about when we hear stories like this?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. What we have to remember is that when you're giving vaccines to millions of people, the vaccine is a point in time, and other things are going on in people's lives that precipitate illness. So it becomes very difficult for us as humans to say, well, the vaccine happened and something bad happened, well, therefore the vaccine must have caused it. The reassurance we have is that these vaccines that are in the market right now were tested on hundreds of thousands of people, literally. The side effects are, every single one is monitored carefully by a review committee. And there's been nothing in the trials that suggests that these vaccines cause these kind of severe illnesses like the one that's being right now discussed as potentially being in conjunction with somebody who took the vaccine. So this is true. This is true for all vaccines. And a lot of the anti-vaccine movement that was really triggered by some shoddy science around children who took vaccines and then developed autism. And the science has now pretty conclusively demonstrated that the development of autism, terrible diagnosis, really had nothing to do with taking the vaccine. These were diagnoses that were going to happen anyway, and the vaccine was just one of a series of events. To think of it another way, if somebody develops a disease, well, we seldom go back and think of the fact, well, they crossed the street 2 weeks before. And of course, if we actually focused on crossing the street, we may say, well, that person developed the disease because he crossed the street. Now, I'm not saying that to minimize, and I really want to be careful that I'm not misunderstood, because I do think that in a moment like this, all those cases should be taken seriously, and the science should be looking very carefully to make sure that there's nothing we're missing. But there are systems in place, and we as a country are very good at looking at these cases and making sure that there's nothing that we're missing.
And Dr. Galea, we should note that the article goes further to point out that roughly 9 million people here in the U.S. have received the vaccine already. And as far as side effects go, the most serious problems reported were these 29 cases of anaphylaxis. That's the severe allergic reaction. And none of those were fatal. Remind us, did you get the... Go ahead.
And those were among people, and those were among people who previously had history of anaphylaxis and allergic reactions to things. Sorry, go ahead, Tim.
No, I was just going to remind us, did you get vaccinated yet?
No, I have not. I'm not patient-facing, meaning I run a school of public health, and although a lot of our students and a number of our faculty deal with patients, I don't on a day-to-day basis. So I'm not in the high-risk category. So I will wait my turn when that comes in a few months.
But you would be comfortable getting any of these vaccines that are available and have been tested now, right?
Oh, if I could get the vaccine tomorrow, I would. But I also want to respect the fact that there are people who are higher risk than I am, and they should get the vaccine first. But if the vaccine were available tomorrow, I would indeed, because I would like to make sure that I'm no longer at risk of getting COVID. And I think all your listeners should feel the same way.
Listen, before we leave, we'd be remiss if we didn't ask you 45 seconds here. What's going on at the Boston University School of Public Health? Are you bringing students back? What's the expectation? And just got about 45 seconds.
Yeah, our current thinking is to do what we did in the fall, which is where we create the opportunity for students to learn in person if they need to learn in person. We will teach some students in person, some digitally, so it will be a bit of a mix. But many universities, for example, like Princeton and Brown, who they were not in person in the fall, are now coming back in the spring and doing just that, which is saying to students, if you need to learn in person, your circumstances are such that you need to be here in person, we will create those conditions for you. And the students who want to learn from home can learn from home.
Thank you so much. Always learn so much when you come on with us. So thank you so much. Stay safe and look forward to next time. Dr. Sandro Galea, he's Dean at the Boston University School of Public Health, on the phone from Boston. And do check out his book. We've talked a lot about the inequities when it comes to healthcare. He's written a book. It's called Pained, Uncomfortable Conversations About the Public's Health. I mean, this is, I feel like, a conversation we have to continue to have.
Yeah, I think one thing that's become clear is that the pandemic has exposed so much about our society that so many people were familiar with, but we're finally having a conversation about the inequities and inequalities within our healthcare system, and perhaps what we can do to finally start to address those.
Yeah, life at large, and hopefully those conversations lead to actions. All right, let's get back to world and national news. Over to Nancy Lyons we go in our 99.1 newsroom in the nation's capital. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Carol. House lawmakers have been debating the merits of a resolution pressuring Vice President Mike Pence to move forward and use the 25th Amendment to remove the president from office. Maryland Congressman Jamie Raskin says the 25th Amendment was written specifically for this moment.
All we have to ask is whether the president lived up to the most basic and minimal expectations for his duties of office. Can you imagine any other president of the United States doing what this president did?
Republicans on the House Rules Committee argue it's not the place for lawmakers to pressure the vice president to invoke the 25th Amendment. Pence is not expected to follow through, so lawmakers are likely to continue with their impeachment proceedings tomorrow. Trump is to face a single impeachment charge, incitement of insurrection. After a slow rollout, health officials are encouraging states to make the COVID-19 vaccines available to more people and fast.
The Trump administration is trying to speed up the immunization campaign. Shots will now be available to anyone 65 years old and older, regardless of underlying conditions. The recommendations from CDC Director Dr. Robert Redfield follows President-elect Joe Biden's pledge to release more of the available vaccine supply. Operation Warp Speed had been holding back doses to make sure those who got that first shot would be able to get the second one. In Washington, I'm Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
2 more people, both in Maryland, have been diagnosed with a variant of the coronavirus. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons.
All right, Nancy, really appreciate that. Carol Massar, along with Tim Stanovic, a couple stories we want to still bring you when it comes to the vaccine and COVID. One is Dow Jones reporting that the U.S. government is expected to require all international airline passengers to show proof of a negative COVID-19 test before boarding flights to the country, according to those in the know. Like, this gets to, do we need a health passport? Are we ultimately going to get to that point?
Yeah, I think this is different, and I think I have such mixed feelings about this because in one sense, like, this would have been helpful, 11 months ago.
Fair.
But we obviously didn't have the testing infrastructure built up for that.
Right.
I think it's the right thing to do. But it's also, when you get tested, it's not a perfect system. And you could get tested and develop symptoms or shed virus after getting tested and not know the result.
Right. I agree with you. I think that's what somebody once said to me. You know what they need to do? If you're going to travel, you're going to go to a hotel that's right next to the airport. You're going to have to stay there for a couple of days, get tested before you can get on a plane. I mean, that makes it kind of ridiculous. But you do think about that. That's what you probably really need to do it truly safely.
But Carol, some countries do that. And those are the countries where there aren't outbreaks. Those are the countries where
society's kind of open?
Yeah, 7-8 months without one case
Does it
of
rhyme
community
with?
spread. Taiwan, for example, right? That's one of those countries.
Yeah, exactly. And listen, the other thing is, while we're talking about this, I got to bring this story because it just crossed the Bloomberg at about 2:30. COVID-19 deaths are likely to climb by at least another 80,000 in the next 4 weeks, according to some new forecasts. These are big numbers.
Carol, that's just here in the U.S.
That's just
You told me this during the break, and I said, in the U.S. or worldwide? Because that is just a mind-boggling number.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it has to do with the holidays, right? And everybody getting together. I also think it's people are tired of just kind of staying at home and doing nothing.
Yeah, and then
Sorry,
look, I'm afraid.
had a moment.
No, I'm just afraid. I was just looking at the stats here, and I'm just afraid we are becoming numb to these numbers. 4,000 a day, 3,000 a day.
These are big numbers.
Big numbers.
This is.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Choppy session. We've got the S&P lower now, down 2 points at 37.96, a drop of about 0.1%. S&P has been swinging between gains and losses. The Dow remains higher by 16 points, up by about 0.1%. Nasdaq up 13, higher by 0.1%. Stocks mixed. Benchmark Treasury note yields lingering at 10-month highs as investors mull the prospects of the economic recovery and a vaccine rollout. 10-year, the yield there 1.13%, up 4/30 seconds. Gold, talking about spot gold at $18.53 the ounce, up 0.5%. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.7%, higher by 86 cents a barrel, 53.11. Recapping, stocks mixed. S&P lower by 3, down 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, really appreciate that. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Master along with Tim Stanovic. So Spotify, it's the most popular paid music service in the world. Stocks soared something like 110% last year. It's up another 9% so far this year. And yet, tiny little thing, it hasn't turned a profit since its founding back in 2006. So what is its big bet of profitability? This story covers that. Reporting for Bloomberg Business Week, Lucas Shaw, he is Bloomberg News entertainment reporter on the phone in LA, along with Bloomberg Business Week editor Joel Weber on the Access line in Brooklyn. This is such a smart story, really everything and anything you want to know about Spotify and its plans to be profitable, Joel.
Yeah, and if I rewind my relationship with Lucas, I think the very first time I met him when I took over Bloomberg Business Week, he stopped me in my tracks and he was like, podcast, man, podcast. And he's so right. And this story is a modest reflection of it. And the thing that I kind of love about it is, Spotify has long been a music service. And along that way, they realized that music is actually not that profitable. A lot of that revenue ends up having to go back to the record labels, and they've been unsuccessful at really being able to have artists come directly to them. But what they've realized is that podcasts have gigantic revenue potential. So Lucas, Joe Rogan is the thing that everybody knows, but what does Spotify have in the works?
Spotify has plans for any kind of show you can think of, and then 10 other kinds of shows you probably never thought about. I mean, they bought Bill Simmons' company. He hosts a very popular sports podcast, and they're now working on dozens of different sports and pop culture shows. They have, Jamel Hill coming in to work on a network of shows and for Black women. They have Michelle Obama. They have the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. They make kind of really cheaply made true crime shows. They're working on shows all over the world, both as originals and translations. Think about the exhaustion you feel trying to consider how many different TV shows are available right now, and then multiply that times about 100 or 1,000 for podcasts.
So for years, Lucas, this was a sort of idea of experience when it came to music streaming services, right? The same music was offered on Apple Music, that was offered on Spotify, some people had Tidal, whatever YouTube or Google was calling their current music service, had the same music. But now it seems to have changed because of podcasts. Do you see this sort of evolving in the way that streaming video services have evolved, where if you want to listen to Joe Rogan or if you want to listen to Michelle Obama, the only place to do that ultimately will be with a Spotify subscription?
I think it'll be very similar to streaming TV, but with a slight change in that some of the podcasts may still want to be available everywhere. There is not a dominant player in podcasting. Spotify is not there yet, especially not in the U.S. And so for some shows, it really hurts their potential audience size to only be there. But you'll see them play with windows of exclusivity, and there's lots of different forms of that. So the Michelle Obama podcast started as a Spotify exclusive. Now that it's been off for several months and Spotify sort of sucked up all the potential customers, it has been distributed more widely in other places. A show like The Rewatchables, which Bill Simmons' company makes, where they kind of talk about old movies, all those new episodes are available everywhere. But if you want to go back and listen to any of the older episodes, you have to go to Spotify. So I think we're going to see a lot of playing with that, and definitely Spotify's competitors are starting to do the same. You know, Amazon just bought Wondery, which is a podcast studio, and has struck rights for exclusive shows. Apple has a handful of exclusive shows, but I think we're going to see them really increase that investment at some point in the next 12 to 18 months.
Just on the rewatchables, I highly recommend the Point Break episode. That
I knew
is
you
like
were going to go there.
mine. Yeah, it's so good. But Lucas, you brought up a couple of competitors there, and you know, Apple is one that I'm really curious about because you know, a couple of years ago when they spun off podcasts as a separate thing from iTunes, this was before sort of Apple Music. They sort of had a missed opportunity there, and it seems like Spotify's really doubled down on it, and by making podcasts such a seamless part of the user interface. So who's ultimately on the team within Spotify that's you know, cracked this code?
Well, it started with an executive named Courtney Holt, I would say, who joined after kind of a long career in media. He dabbled in trying to make original videos work at Spotify, and then quickly glommed onto this idea of building a podcasting apparatus. He was smart enough to kind of know what he didn't know, and so he went out kind of armed with the checkbook to buy a bunch of companies that were studios they could bring in to create the infrastructure right away. So they bought Gimlet Media, which is a really good podcast studio based in New York, perhaps best known for the show Reply All. The guys who run Gimlet Media are now Spotify employees, overseeing a lot of the podcasting business, not just Gimlet. They bought Parcast, which was another studio based in Los Angeles. They bought Anchor, which was a technology company they brought in. Again, they bought the Simmons company. And so they have, you know, there's a whole new part of that business. I was talking with somebody on the music side recently who acknowledged that there were hundreds of Spotify employees and an entire kind of group and team that they didn't know and they almost never interfaced with. And it's a really, you know, it's a bet the company kind of move for Spotify.
So I got to ask you, I mentioned coming in the stock up more than 100% last year. So investors are kind of betting big. They've got expectations. Lucas, have they cracked the code for becoming profitable based on all of your reporting? I got to say, those ad insertions, those streaming ad insertions drive me crazy. But
if you're paying for it, it does, right?
Yeah. So I do wonder, like, have they cracked the code?
The way I like to think about it is that Daniel Ek, Spotify's CEO, has bought himself time to figure it out. They definitely have not cracked the code yet. Podcasting is still a very small business. And I agree that delivering ads to people who pay for Spotify Premium is something that they might have to work on in the future. But what they're trying to do is to just continue to get bigger and bigger. Spotify now has more than 300 million customers, more than 140 million paid. If they can get to 500 million users, 600 million users, 700 million users, that becomes so big that I just think that advertisers have to take it seriously, and you'll see more of that money shift over from radio, because radio, for all of its problems, in the U.S. alone is like a $13, $14, $15 billion business. If Spotify can take $5 billion of that money at a better margin than it has on the paid service, then it becomes a real business. We're just not there yet.
Yeah, well, expectations are definitely high on Wall Street. It's an incredible story. There's so much detail. It's such a smart read, and another great report by Lucas Shaw. Lucas, thank you so much. Entertainment reporter at Bloomberg News, with us on the phone from LA. Check him out at Twitter at Lucas_Shaw. Jill Weber, of course, editor of Bloomberg Businessweek on the remote access from Brooklyn. And for those of you listening in New York, D.C., and San Francisco, watching on YouTube, Bloomberg Businessweek continues. Tim and I will be back. If you're listening on Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, Bay State Business is coming up next. I'm going to say that was one of my favorite stories. No doubt about it today. I loved it. But coming up is also an incredible story. Do you know where we're going?
I don't even know what you're talking about.
Ryder.
Oh, yeah. We're going to actually hear from somebody who spoke to one of the people who went in the Capitol riot last week and has no regrets.
It's incredible. And I think it's important that we all understand about the people who were there rioting in Washington.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We move into the final hour of trading on this Tuesday, January 12th. Stocks are mixed. Little change right now on the S&P. It's been fluctuating between gains and losses. Right now, the S&P is down half a point. Let me get right to the numbers. I'll give you the why in a moment here. The Dow up 44, up 0.1%. NASDAQ up 21. For the NASDAQ Composite Index, a gain of 0.2%. NASDAQ 100 Index swinging between gains and losses, back on the minus side now. NASDAQ 100 Index down by about 0.1%. Dow Transport's up 1.6%. Russell 2000 up today by 1.5%. So again, recapping here, equities trading mixed. S&P just turning around, back on the plus side now, up by 1 point. 10-year up 3/30 seconds. 10-year yield 1.13%. We've got gold up $9 the ounce now, up 0.5%, 18.53. And the advance for crude continues, 10-month high. WTI West Texas Intermediate crude 53.16 a barrel. WTI up right now by just about 1.7%. So it is an up day on Wall Street with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing today. Some of the other stories that we're following for you today, we've got Professional Holding Corp saying it will no longer provide banking services to President Trump's company as it joins lenders distancing themselves from him after last week's assault on the U.S. Capitol. Shares of Professional Holding, ticker PFHD, they're up right now by 0.7%. Sources say the government is expected to require all international airline passengers to show proof of a negative COVID-19 test before boarding flights to the U.S. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention planning to issue that order as soon as today, following weeks of discussions among federal agencies and the White House Coronavirus Task Force. Among American-based carriers with international operations, shares of UAL up by 2.9%, American up 1.8%, Delta up 2.2%, Southwest up by 2%. Again, recapping, stocks higher, S&P up by 1 point, a gain of less than 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Bloomberg Quick Takes Tim Stenovic on Bloomberg Radio.
You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week, and a top story today because I think it's safe to say that many of us believe that in figuring out what went wrong last Wednesday, the riot and breaching of the Capitol, we need to understand those that did it, ask the question why, and we need to talk to them, Tim.
Yeah, we do. This was just a fascinating piece by our colleague William Turton. No Regrets, a Capitol rioter tells his story from the inside. And I think a lot of people are wondering, what were these people thinking? And fortunately, we have William with us to really help shine a light on that.
Yeah, he's on the phone in New York City. The story among the most read on the Bloomberg. William, so good to have you here. It's a must-read for everyone. So tell us about the individual that you talked to, Brandon Fellows.
Hi, thanks for having me on. So Brandon Fellows is a 26-year-old from upstate New York who decided to go to the Trump rally when he saw a tweet from President Trump in December. He said there's going to be a big rally on the 6th in D.C. He said, be there, it will be wild. So when Fellows saw that tweet, he decided to go to D.C. And, something really revealing that he told me is that, while he does believe the election was rigged and he has been, consuming a lot of content about election fraud, his primary motivation was his anger at government shutdowns due to coronavirus, which I thought was really kind of fascinating.
Yeah, that part was really interesting, William. And I wonder, too, what it says about the idea of, there's so much psychology here, right? Like, why were these people, who many of whom are now apologizing, what sort of sparked them to actually make this move, to do something? Right. And what did he tell you about that?
Well, something fascinating about Brandon is that he had never been to a Trump rally before. And when he came to this rally, he didn't even know that there was a march. He simply came to see Trump speak. So he quite literally got swept up into the mob when he joined this march. And by the time he had already reached the Capitol, the outside perimeter had been breached. So, he walked onto the Capitol lawn and scaled a wall and eventually climbed through a window to get into the Senate. And once inside, he got into the office of Senator Merkley, a Democrat from Oregon, where he put his feet up on the table and smoked a joint.
Why did he understand he was breaking the law by doing that?
It's hard to know. He claims that because he wasn't being arrested while inside, And in fact, the police officer gave him directions to the statue hall inside the Capitol that, he was under the assumption he wasn't doing anything wrong.
Right.
Of course, that kind of is difficult to believe, but I think it's revealing. He did not think that he was going to get in trouble for doing this based on the reaction of the police officers.
You talk about in the piece that he's had some friction with his family over this and over his beliefs.
A lot of friction, it sounds like.
Yeah, and I think it's probably something that a lot of us can relate to with the way that disagreements politically are happening right now. I'm wondering, after talking to him, take us through what he's planning to do moving forward. I mean, how does one move past an inflection point like this?
Well, I'm not sure in speaking to him if he's actually grappled with the fact that he's done something wrong. One of the reasons we know that is because he's planning actually to return to D.C. For more events on the 20th surrounding the inauguration. But I think you both made a really interesting point at the beginning of this program in that, some people will say that we shouldn't listen to people and that by talking to them is platforming them, but I think they're wrong. It's actually really important to understand the psychology and motivations of these people, and there's a really good example of that. I mean, these folks said that they planned to storm the Capitol on the 6th. No one listened to them, no one took them seriously, and then they actually did it. I think just in general, we need to actually listen to what these people are saying.
Well, William, and Tim and I were talking beforehand, I really do want to understand these voters. I know Tim does too. How did we get to this point? And we need to stop ignoring, parts of the voting public or parts of the country, because this is how we get to these places. I mean, you tell his story. He lives in a converted school bus. He stopped working last spring because of fears of COVID-19. And you said, he became disillusioned when New York State denied him unemployment benefits. I mean, we talked about the opioid epidemic in the past, that people who were just kind of lost in society. I mean, we really need to understand these stories and these individuals who feel like there is no voice for them. And this is where the president, in many large ways, did speak to them.
Right. But I think it's also important to understand that these people are becoming radicalized by the internet. I mean, he told me that he gets the majority of his news from YouTube. He pointed out Ben Shapiro and Steven Crowder. He also said he's recently started watching Newsmax and One America News, which have both promoted false claims of a rigged election. So, the culpability of platforms like YouTube and Facebook and Twitter are apparent in this riot.
It's no different than, forgive me, because I'm hearing radicalized by the internet. It's no different than we talked about terrorists, right? We think about 9/11 and after 9/11, that individuals who are being radicalized by the internet, we saw that as a bad thing.
Yes. I mean, a lot of folks who ended up joining the Islamic State were radicalized by YouTube.
Right.
I mean, it
didn't just happen on the Homeland series. I'm just going to say, folks, it didn't just happen on Homeland.
Well, William, you bring up a really good point, because you mentioned news networks, One America News, you mentioned Newsmax, and you talked about YouTube. And the platforms that have really gotten all the attention in the last 6 days have been Twitter and Facebook because of their actions against President Trump, and Amazon because of its deplatforming of Parler. But the conversation is much bigger when it comes to the message and the radicalization, right?
Right. And you make a good point. I mean, YouTube is really dodging a lot of criticism here that I think needs to be focused on them. I mean, their platform is sort of unlike any other in terms of pumping out misinformation. And for years now, the algorithm, the YouTube recommendation algorithm, has prioritized the most divisive content, which pushes people to the kind of more crazier and zanier conspiracies. And from what we've been able to tell, YouTube has done very little to address this.
I wonder, I mean, you obviously can't make prescriptions here, but why do you think YouTube has avoided some of the conversation that we've seen over the last week? Why do you think it's sort of the sleeping giant when it comes to radicalization?
Well, it's really hard for journalists and researchers and other people to actually kind of quantify and show the amount of misinformation because of the nature of videos themselves. I mean, it's kind of like a law of large numbers problem. I mean, in a tweet or a Facebook post, right, it's apparent, right? You can just see a screenshot and you can see what's happening. But in videos that, maybe are 30 minutes or an hour long, it's way more nuanced and way more difficult to actually moderate
But
and that's why people focus on the recommendation algorithm as a thing that they could do to not prioritize this kind of most divisive content.
We do want to tell our audience that President Trump has begun speaking in Alamo, Texas. He is at the wall, or part of the wall that has been built between the U.S. and Mexico border. We're going to monitor his conversation and take you there. Actually, I think we're going to take you there now. Our thanks to our William Turton, cybersecurity reporter. Let's take you to Texas and President Trump.
Incredible. They're really incredible. I've gotten to know you very well over the last 4 years. Many of you are friends from all of the work we did in designing the wall. We got it exactly as you wanted it. Everything, including your protective plate on top. I say, why did we put that? And they said, we need it for extra protection, climb plate. And we have everything you want. It's steel, it's concrete inside the steel, and then it's rebar, a lot of heavy rebar inside the concrete. And it's as strong as you're going to get and strong as you can have. But we gave you 100% of what you wanted, so now you have no excuses. I didn't want you to have any excuses. And you set records, and we can't let the next administration even think about taking it down, if you can believe that. I don't think that will happen. I think when you see what it does and how it's so important for our country, nobody's going to be touching it, and you are very proud of it, and you're proud of the work you did, because we really designed it together. We're joined together to celebrate a great achievement, the extraordinarily successful building of the wall on the southern border. Before we begin, I'd like to say that free speech is under assault like never before. The 25th Amendment is of zero risk to me, but will come back to haunt Joe Biden and the Biden administration. As the expression goes, be careful what you wish for. The impeachment hoax is a continuation of the greatest and most vicious witch hunt in the history of our country, and is causing tremendous anger and division and pain, far greater than most people will ever understand, which is very dangerous for the USA, especially at this very tender time. And now I'd like to briefly address the events of last week. Millions of our citizens watched on Wednesday as a mob stormed the Capitol and trashed the halls of government. As I have consistently said throughout my administration, we believe in respecting America's history and traditions, not tearing them down. We believe in the rule of law, not in violence or rioting. Because of the pandemic, horrible, horrible, invisible enemy, and despite our tremendous success developing a vaccine years before it was thought even remotely possible. Nobody thought it was going to be possible. They said it would take 5 years. Sir, it will take 7 years. All of our scientists were saying, our advisors, it will take 7 years, 5 years, 10 years maybe. Well, we did it just like I said we would, and we had it out years and years before they thought it was possible. And we're now delivering it to states, including your state, where your governor and government are doing a terrific job in getting it administered in Texas. And Florida's doing great. Some of them are doing great. Some aren't doing as well, but they have all they can handle, and we get it to them as fast as they need it, and even faster. But they're calling it a medical miracle, and this has been a difficult year and a very difficult election. The pandemic has made it a very, very difficult year for our country and virtually every country all over the world. Now is the time for our nation to heal, and it's time for peace and for calm, respect for law enforcement and the great people within law enforcement, so many are here, is the foundation of the MAGA agenda. And we're a nation of law, and we're a nation of order. That is why we're here today to talk about what we must do to uphold the rule of law in America and how we must continue to support our law enforcement heroes, which is exactly what you are. Do you feel like a hero? Yeah, I think you do, right? You do, and you are. I want to thank Customs and Border Patrol Commissioner Mark Morgan, who's been incredible. Where's Mark? Mark, stand up, Mark. Great job. Fantastic. Chief Patrol Agent Brian Hastings. Brian, thank you very much. Great job. He's so happy with it. He said, sir, this really works. and most importantly, the brave law enforcement officers who risk their lives every day to protect our families and our country. I also want to thank a tremendous gentleman, a friend of mine, Tom Holman. He's a great American patriot, and he was with us right from the beginning, right, Tom? You knew exactly. He said, we need a wall. When they were saying, no, we need drones, we need drones. I said, why? So you could watch the people pour into our country illegally? And I want to thank you very much, Tom. What a professional job you've done. All of you people, incredible. Everyone here today is part of an incredible success story. This is a real success story. When I took office, we inherited a broken, dysfunctional, and open border. Everybody was pouring in at will, working alongside the heroes in this great outdoor space, looking at our wall. We reformed our immigration system and achieved the most secure southern border in U.S. history. It is at a level that it's never been before. We took on the cartels, the coyotes, and the special interests, and we restored the rule of law. For years, politicians ran for office promising to secure the border only to get elected and to do the absolute exact opposite. They even promised a wall, if you remember. About 10 years ago, they promised a wall, but they couldn't get it built. It wasn't easy getting it built. Getting it financed was tough. Getting it built was even tougher. All the different chains of title and all the different things we had to go through. Very, very complex and very difficult, but we got it done. But they had it years ago. You remember that better than anybody, right? And they never got it done. They never, ever completed the task. And then ultimately, the money was sent back to the federal government. Spent, but no wall was built. But unlike those who came before me, I kept my promises. And today we celebrate.
Okay, you are listening to President Trump. He is there in Alamo, Texas, speaking at the border wall in Texas. We'll continue to monitor that conversation. In the meantime, we want to take you to the nation's capital, D.C., a Department of Justice presser, with the Assistant Director of the FBI Washington Field Office. It is Stephen D. Antonio. I'm mispronouncing it, but let's take you in.
Videos to FBI.gov/US Capitol, that's Capitol with an O. I want to stress that the FBI has a long memory and a broad reach. Agents and our partners are on the streets investigating leads not only here in the D.C. area, but also across the country through the FBI's 56 field offices. So even, like I've said before, even if you've left D.C., agents from our local field offices will be knocking on your door if we find out that you were part of the criminal activity at the Capitol. But before we do this is your opportunity to come forward, as several individuals who were involved in Wednesday's riots have done, to volunteer about their participation. In the weeks leading up to the January 6th rally, the FBI worked internally with every FBI field office to ensure that we were looking for any intelligence that may have developed about potential violence during the rally on January 6th. We developed some intelligence that a number of individuals were planning to travel to the D.C. area with intentions to cause violence. We immediately shared that information and action was taken, as demonstrated by the arrest of Enrique Tarrio by the Metropolitan Police Department the night before the rally. Other individuals were identified in other parts of the country and the travel subsequently disrupted. The FBI receives enormous amounts of information and intelligence, and our job is to determine the credibility and viability of it under the laws and policies that govern FBI investigations. We have to separate the aspirational from the intentional and determine which of the individuals saying despicable things on the internet are just practicing keyboard bravado or they actually have the intent to do harm. In the latter, we work diligently to identify them and prevent them from doing so. As offensive as a statement can be, the FBI cannot open an investigation without a threat of violence or alleged criminal activity. However, when that language does turn to a call of violence or criminal activity, the FBI is able to undertake investigative action. And in this case, we had no indication information was linked to any specific person, but this is a matter of an online discussion. This information was immediately disseminated through a written product
and briefed through our command post operations to all levels of law enforcement. Part and parcel of our investigation into violent actors is the fact that we continue to gather intelligence that will aid in our ability to disrupt possible future violent activity. Suffice it to say, we are leveraging our relationships with federal, state, and local law enforcement partners, using our tools at our disposal to find and bring everyone involved in last week's criminal activity to justice. I'm now going to turn over to Acting U.S. Attorney Michael Sherman.
All right, thank you, Steve. I think I mentioned this before a few days ago that, just to begin, I think the scope and scale of this investigation in these cases are really unprecedented, not only in FBI history, but probably DOJ history, in which essentially the Capitol grounds outside and inside are essentially a crime scene. And a scale in which we have literally thousands of potential witnesses, and a scenario in which we're going to have, I believe, hundreds of criminal cases, both filed with our local courts, the Superior Court, and through the federal court system. So just to frame things, the enormity of this investigation is going to take a lot of work and a lot of effort, and this is not going to be solved overnight. It's not going to be solved within the coming weeks. It's not going to be solved within the coming months. This is going to be a long-term investigation, and rest assured, the Bureau, the Department of Justice, all the U.S. attorneys across the United States that are assisting in these investigations, everyone is in for the long haul. So that being said, let's turn to the numbers that Steve referenced. And the numbers are going to geometrically increase. So as we sit here now, literally days after this event happened, we have already opened more than 170 subject files, meaning these individuals have been identified as potential persons that committed crimes on the Capitol grounds, inside and outside. So of those 170 cases that have already been opened, and I anticipate that's going to grow to the hundreds in the next coming weeks, we've already charged over 70 cases. And again, that number, I suspect, is going to grow into the hundreds. So what are the types of cases we initially charged? And I think there's some misconceptions, and I want to clarify some of those misconceptions, because given the enormity of the actors we saw both inside and outside the Capitol, the range of criminal conduct is really, I think, again, unmatched in any type of scenario that we've seen, the FBI or the DOJ. We're looking at everything from simple trespass to theft of mail, to theft of digital devices inside the Capitol, to assault on local officers, federal officers, both outside and inside the Capitol, to the theft of potential national security information or national defense information, to felony murder, and even civil rights excessive force investigations. So just the gamut of cases and criminal conduct we're looking at is really mind-blowing. And that has really put an enormous amount of work on the plate of the FBI and field office throughout the entire United States. So let's look at those initial cases. And again, I want to clarify some misconceptions. When criminal conduct occurs, we try to obviously charge people as soon as possible. So the way, looking just at the federal system, we'll try to do that via criminal complaint. So when these actors left the Capitol, these individuals, these defendants, obviously the impetus, the marching orders by federal law enforcement was to find, fix, and charge these individuals as fast as possible. So the prosecutors from the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office, we looked for the most simple charge we could file as quick as possible. So therefore, the initial charges filed in these cases, a lot of them were misdemeanors. They were trespass cases. However,
all right, you are listening to the Acting U.S. Attorney for D.C., Michael Sherwin. This is a Department of Justice press conference. Earlier we heard from the Assistant Director of FBI, their Washington field office, but they are specifically talking about the investigation of those who were part of the riots and protests and the breaching of the U.S. Capitol last Wednesday. I think what was interesting to me, Tim, a lot of headlines we're going to continue to monitor, but he said already more than 170 subject files have already been opened. The potential subjects he's expecting to grow to over hundreds of cases is how he said it. And he said they've already charged over 70 cases. But I mean, the list of charges, you and I were kind of gasping as he went through it.
Yes, simple trespass, theft of mail, theft of digital devices, assault of a federal officer, felony murder, civil rights, excessive force. The list goes on and on.
Right, and also talked about the timeline, saying the enormity of the investigation, it's not going to be solved in a few days nor weeks. This is something that will go on for months, but he said the dedication of the Justice Department and those who are pursuing this, they are in it for the long haul. So this is something that will carry over well into the Biden administration. All right, we're going to continue to monitor any more headlines out of that Justice Department presser. We're also monitoring President Trump, who is speaking at the border wall in Texas. I do want to bring you one headline that certainly did catch our attention before we get an update on today's trading day, but definitely caught our attention. The president saying that the 25th Amendment, not a threat to him specifically, Tim.
He did say also that Joe Biden should worry more about it, which seems like more like a political comment. But saying, hey, I'm not at risk for removal under the 25th Amendment.
Also, in his opinion, perhaps, saying that free speech is under assault, although I think a lot of people are having a conversation, especially with the limits social media has put on him specifically. We are all trying to figure out exactly what free speech means in this world. All right, we'll continue to monitor those two things, bring you any more headlines as they are known. In the meantime, let's get a check once again on that trading day and your top business headlines. Here is Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much. 34 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell here. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ higher has been a choppy day. Right to the numbers. Give you the why in a moment here. S&P up 2 right now, 38.01, up less than 0.1%. The Dow's up 65. That is a gain of 0.2%. NASDAQ up 32 right now, up 0.3%. NASDAQ 100 index swinging between gains and losses, down 10 points now. A drop for the NASDAQ 100 index of 0.1%. Russell 2000 up 1.6%. Dow Transports up by 1.7%. 10-year yield 1.13%. Gold up $11 the ounce at $18.55, up 0.6%. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.7%, $53.15 a barrel. After the bell, we will be hearing from KB Home. KB Home shares up now by 0.8%. Bottom line, stocks higher, little change. Benchmark Treasury note yields lingering at 10-month highs. Investors continue to mull the prospects of the economic recovery and vaccine rollout. Now, I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
You're Charlie Pellet. All right, thank you so much. All right, so not exactly rats fleeing a sinking ship, but increasingly we're seeing former supporters, partners of President Trump, flee any association with him. Bloomberg News finance reporter Max Abelson writing this story, and he joins us on the phone in New York City. Max, incredible story again. I've got to read, wait, the first line of your story, because I love how you write things. Quote, this is exactly from a story. It's right here in the first few pages of Trump University Branding 101. The truth is, everything you say and do is important. And this was Trump writing in the 2008 books Forward. Actions matter. Actions matter, Max.
Oh, that's right. First of all, Carol, it is so nice to hear your voice and to get to do an interview with you. And, you're right. As Trump himself said, actions matter. And what he did last week is he egged on a group of supporters who turned into a mob, which started a riot inside the U.S. Capitol. And what that did is two things, Carol. First, it created an emergency for American democracy. You know, we have never faced anything like this.
Right.
And the second thing it did is it created an emergency for the likes of which Donald Trump has never seen in his career before. You know, he is about to go back to being a regular citizen and therefore back to being a businessman. And his business career, Carol, is the story of catastrophe followed by rebound. But I think it's fair to say that he has never, in a career that has seen, many different companies or subsidiaries go bankrupt, he's never seen what's happening now, which is, being shunned by, essentially by much of corporate America.
Which one, Max, has the biggest consequence here? You run through certainly a host of these. You said he's been rejected by Wall Street, by Silicon Valley, Washington, internet giants taking away his megaphone on social media. But you also highlight Deutsche Bank and Signature Bank. And you point out that Ivanka Trump once served on the board of Signature Bank. How does Trump have a business career if banks don't want to touch him?
I love that detail about Signature, and I love that you know it, Tim. I think that Bloomberg News is at its heart we chronicle capitalism. So let's talk about finance. So Donald Trump owes, I believe, $300 million to Deutsche Bank, and that's coming due. I forget when, but let's call it $300 million. So if Deutsche is not going to do more business with him, and if banks are going to be genuinely pressured, that is going to be a potential problem for this man. on the other hand, I talked with a source today who has known Trump, who said, look, Trump, Trump could get that money from one guy, maybe a billionaire or maybe a $1 billion hedge fund loans Trump the money he needs. He would be that would solve that problem. He will then have lots of other problems. So to name a second one, let's think about tech. If Twitter is going to permanently ban him and Facebook is going to extend its ban to be permanent, those are going to really impact the volume with which he can yell to his fans. And even a kind of right-wing alternate like Parler that's not necessarily a solution. It's been pressured offline essentially by Amazon, Google, and Apple.
And I thank you. You mentioned the $300 million outstanding, Max. They come due in 2023 and 2024. So, not so far off. What's interesting, though, too, we talk about the finance firms saying that they're going to use the power of their campaign donations to condemn what happened in D.C. last week. I do think about, though, Wall Street sometimes talks tough, Max. You cover Wall Street so closely. You're talking with these guys. You know the ins and outs. I do wonder longer term whether that changes because, politics makes strange bedfellows often.
It sure does. That is such a powerful reality that, Wall Street may be under pressure today and may be acting a certain way because of that pressure, but who knows what will happen tomorrow and who knows what will happen next year. And, on that note, I really feel like I have almost a journalistic obligation out of fairness and out of just sharing with listeners what I've learned while interviewing Donald Trump and interviewing his colleagues and writing about his business empire. Woe to the journalist or to anyone who underestimates Trump. You could have counted him out in the 1990s.
Right.
You could have counted him out in the early aughts. And he has defied every law of gravity and has managed to bounce back. Now, mind you, he is not the, $20 billion man or something like that he sometimes pretends he is. But he does have a genuine business after all these years. And of course, he is also not a self-made man. He inherited a lot of money from his father. But he is a billionaire with an ongoing organization that, has managed time and again to defy expectations. And, that's why I feel like we have to at least give a flick at the possibility that something dramatic will happen to somehow bail this man out.
Max, I just want to end very briefly, 10 seconds. Talking golf here, how big of a deal is it that PGA of America said its board voted to end an agreement to host the PGA Championship next year at a Trump golf course?
Well,
he loves golf. We know he's got a soft spot for this.
That's right, Carol. A big deal apparently for him. But don't forget, the PGA has stood up to him before. They took a tournament away from him in California, I believe, in Los Angeles, only to then go back to him. So along the lines of what you're saying, we see what's happening today, but with this man, who knows what will happen the day after tomorrow.
Memories are short-lived often. Max, you're the best. Everybody should read everything that Max does. Max Abelson, finance reporter at Bloomberg News. All right, back over to Charlie Pellett with a check on the world of business. Hey, Charlie.
Max swings on Wall Street right now. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ trading mix, 28 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. Benchmark Treasury note yields lingering at 10-month highs. Investors mulling the prospects of the economic recovery and vaccine rollout. S&P 500 index up now by half a point. Again, emphasis on a volatile session here. Choppy day. The Dow up 60, higher by 0.2%. NASDAQ up 28, a gain there of 0.2%. 10-years up 4/30 seconds. 10-year yield 1.13%. Gold up 0.7%, higher by $11 the ounce. Spot gold now at $18.55. West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.8%. 53.16 for a barrel of West Texas Intermediate crude. The Trump administration is encouraging states to widen access to COVID-19 vaccines, all a part of an effort to speed up a stumbling immunization campaign. Health officials are pushing states to expand the shots availability to anyone older than 65, regardless of underlying conditions. The speed up is welcome news for Dr. Amish Adalja, senior scholar at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security.
So a lot of it just has to do with the logistics of doing this. And I think that's why we need to start thinking about mass vaccination and not kind of relying on this being done on a one-by-one line where you sign up, you fill out forms, and you wait. That's just not going to work. That pace is glacial. It's picking up, but it's not going to be enough to stay ahead of this virus, especially if there are, as has been described, new variants that are much more efficient at transmitting. That gives us even more of an urgency to this process.
The Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health is supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Sheldon Adelson, who built the largest casino company in the world and used his wealth to support Republican candidates and groups, has died. Sheldon Adelson, dead at age 87. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You're listening to Bloomberg.
You can't cry 'cause you're laughing.
Enough sleep.
I know. That's
I'm
probably
blaming
what it is.
sleep.
Yeah, let's blame sleep and not my non-encyclopedic version. Oh, man. I'm going to get so much flack for this right now.
Yeah, rightfully so. Going down.
I'm not even going to look at my text messages. People just mad at me that I didn't get this.
I'm just going to say.
Yeah, Carol just made the L loser shape on her forehead from over 6 feet away, pointing straight at me,
Socially
Dave.
distanced.
Are you going to pile it on too, Dave?
Yes.
No.
Come on.
Carol's done more than that.
I'm from a big family. We pile on big time quickly.
Injury. If I'm going to pile on anything at this point, it'll be emerging market stocks.
Oh, there we go.
But
Thank
wait,
you for
Dave,
saving
aren't you
me.
shocked?
Thank you.
Come on, aren't you shocked a little bit?
You know.
My 17-year-old could have gotten that one.
Yeah, well, your 17-year-olds probably listened to music that you picked for a long time.
She's getting quite an education. All right, tell us. Chart emerging markets. What do we got?
Okay, fine. They're down, even though they're up. This is the interesting part. On Friday, you saw the MSCI Emerging Markets Index break a record that was more than 13 years old. And you figure, well, okay, it makes sense. I mean, given, the focus on cheaper shares lately, value stocks, certainly emerging markets fit into that category. You can kind of play it out that way. Then you look at emerging markets relative to U.S. stocks and you say, okay, so the index set a record. They've still got a long way to go when it comes to showing any relative strength. And that's what the chart really kind of lays out. The ratio between the MSCI Emerging Markets Index and the S&P 500 fell from October 2010 through last May. So you're talking, 9.5 years? And it's only made back about 7% of its loss, even with the record that we saw late last week. And what it basically tells you is that these stocks have a long way to go to get back to where they were. Willie Delwich over at Robert W. Baird put out a chart similar to mine and basically labeled it as, reversal appears to have only just begun. Now, this kind of comparison is getting attention because I noticed that J.C. Peretz over at All Star Charts had a post on this over the weekend. So
Right.
clearly, emerging market stocks are getting attention, and you think that, this index set a record, everything's fine. Well, not in relative terms, for sure. And if you want to know more, folks, send me an email. I'll get you the chart, the explanation that goes with it, and everything I do going forward. The email address is dwilson@bloomberg.net. That's dwilson@bloomberg.net.
Yeah, I love emerging markets. I love watching them, but it's been tricky, and there's been a lot of stuff unsettling some of those markets, right, Tim?
Yeah, I mean, so Dave, are you saying that is this chart telling us that the 2021 is unlikely to again be a year of emerging markets?
Well, I mean, it could be, but even if it is a year, figure they had a pretty lousy decade before that. So, there's a lot to make up here. That's what it comes down to.
Favorite Beatles song?
Favorite Beatles song?
I know that's like the meanest thing. Like, how can you ask a favorite Beatles song, right?
That is. I could go on. I'll have to... you should have prepared me, Carol. I know. Thought it out.
All right, maybe when you come
See,
back
now you know how I feel whenever the music plays, Dave. There's no way to prepare
It's
for.
like that dream where you
for
wake
Carol.
up and you're like,
Yes, that's exactly what it's like. Standing in front of the class, not knowing what the song is.
exactly. Dave Wilson. Dave will be back a little bit later on with his talk of the day. Yeah, I'm really being tough on you. I'm so sorry.
You know what's sad is we actually played.
What?
I'm not even gonna say. I have to
Trivial
now.
Pursuit or something?
No, we had Beatles music as we walked down the aisle.
Oh.
Yeah, for our wedding.
One specific song or a bunch?
See, that's the thing. I don't even remember.
I hope Rebecca's not
I know.
listening.
I hope so too.
All right, let's get a check on world and national news. Over to Nancy Lyons in D.C. Nancy.
Hey, Carol, busy afternoon. President Trump addressed the attack on the Capitol today, condemning those who trashed the halls of Congress, but he says it's time to move on.
Now is the time for our nation to heal, and it's time for peace and for calm, respect for law enforcement, and the great people within law enforcement.
He spoke in Alamo, Texas, while standing in front of a section of the border wall. Meanwhile, the FBI and other federal officials say they continue to make arrests in connection with the attacks on the Capitol. Michael Sherwin is the acting U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia.
As we sit here now, literally days after this event happened, we have already opened more than 170 subject files, meaning these individuals have been identified as potential persons that committed crimes on the Capitol grounds, inside and outside.
He says at least 70 people have been charged and adds that hundreds more will be charged. Barely a month into a mass vaccination campaign to stop the COVID-19 pandemic, the Trump administration is shifting gears to speed the delivery of shots. Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar announced key changes to who now is eligible.
We are telling states they should open vaccinations to all people over age 65 and over, and all people under age 65 with a comorbidity with some form of medical documentation as defined by governors.
The shift is similar to the distribution plan recently announced by President-elect Joe Biden. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons.
All right, Nancy, thank you so much. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Massar along with Tim Stanovic. We just came off that Justice Department briefing about the investigations that they're doing into the individuals who were involved with the breaching of the Capitol. There was a story earlier today from the Washington Post, and it said a day before rioters stormed Congress, and forgive me, I'm reading from the story from the Post, an FBI office in Virginia issued an explicit internal warning that extremists were preparing to travel to D.C. to commit violence and, quote, war, according to an internal document reviewed by the Washington Post that contradicts a senior official's declaration that the Bureau had no intelligence indicating anyone at last week's pro-Trump protests planned to do harm. This is, I think, an important story that we get to the bottom of.
It absolutely is. And as you mentioned in the Washington Post, Devlin Barrett and Matt Saposky writing this. This is such a big deal, Carol, because of the lack of preparation, at least that we saw from law enforcement officials, the confusing elements that we've seen in the response to the actual riot.
Right.
Who was responsible for, from a law enforcement perspective, for keeping those lawmakers safe, and why weren't they kept safe? There are a lot of questions that are going to come up. And I imagine, given what we just saw from the Justice Department and the FBI with that press conference, I would imagine that we will see more resignations.
I agree. We
will also see more probes into what exactly went wrong, and people at pretty high levels held accountable for it.
And I think because we are consistently hearing contradictions from members of Congress who, for days ahead of it, were raising kind of the concerns about, wait, are we going to be protected? Or we have enough law enforcement? Like, there's enough contradictions out there about people raising the alarm bells, and then we ultimately didn't have the protection.
Well, I think as you and I have talked about a lot over the past 6 days, this was a rare joint session of Congress, a rare moment when members of the House and Senate were all together in the same place. Security should be very high for that.
All right. So anyway, certainly more to come on this one. You're listening to Bloomberg Radio.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. It's been a choppy session. The Dow, however, close to session highs. But let's head right over to the first word breaking news desk for today's afternoon call. Here he is, Bill Maloney.
And that's right, Charlie. In spite of that choppy session, the stock's in the green right now. Dow's currently up 83 points. S&Ps are up 4. NASDAQ is higher by 42. The U.S. 10-year yield at 1.13%. Gold is up 12. And transports gain 183 points. Among the main 11 S&P sectors, leaders were energy and the materials. Telecom and healthcare were under pressure. And leaders to the upside in the Dow Inc. and Intel, while Merck and Disney led to the downside. After earnings, Albertsons gained 2%. And in other news, Caterpillar hit a record high. Pfizer fell 2% intraday after issuing guidance. And Shake Shack jumped 10% after Q4 preliminary revenue beat estimates. Wrapping things up, KB Home reports after the bell. Live from the first breaking news desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Charlie?
Okay, we thank you very much, Bill. And to hear live breaking news over your Bloomberg, type SQUAWK, SQUAWK, on your terminal. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
Yeah, how about you let me drive?
Oh, no.
Who's gonna drive you home?
Honey, please, I'll do the driving.
Drive on.
Excuse me, I want to drive.
Just drive, baby.
It's the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
Yep, TikTok, everyone. About 11 minutes left in today's trading session. Charlie giving you that rundown, and we're bouncing around. We're definitely off our lows. In fact, we're working our way up. We're back in the green here when it comes to those major averages. Great to have back with us Yana Burton. She's co-director of growth equity over at Eaton Vance. She joins us on the phone from Boston. Nice to have you here. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. What's going on in your world? Tell me, we turned the calendar page. Not a lot really changes, but I have to say the last week, I think there's a lot of soul searching about democracy, what our nation means, thinking about politics, what a new administration ultimately is going to mean, and what division means within not just politics, but within our nation. So I don't know. Is there some way to tie that in and come out with an outlook on the other side?
Well said. I think change is the only constant, right? So I think as an equity investor, you have to appreciate that there are always cross currents in the marketplace, geopolitical, economic. Now we're in the midst of a pandemic with hopefully some light at the end of the tunnel. But I think, again, given some prospect for investors, it's no surprise that equity markets could be volatile. That's why S&P 500 actually declines on average about 15% per year. But over the long term, over the past 5-10 years, it's generated in excess of that.
Wait, explain that again. You're saying on average the S&P is down for the year 15%?
No, what I'm saying is on average, you usually experience what folks refer to as a drawdown, meaning if you look from the peak to the trough levels.
Got it.
On any sort of calendar year basis or a 12-month period that you look at, on average, it's about a 15% decline. Last year, unfortunately, most of us remember it was twice that level, where S&P 500 declined almost 34%. So I guess to your point, we've got a lot to digest right now, both on the fundamental basis as well as the macro basis, as well as the political side of the equation. But I think as an investor, our job is to look forward. And as we sit here today, we think that this is going to be a good backdrop for equity investors, particularly those focused on the long term. Why? Because secular stories that we've talked about for many, many years are still with us, but now we can play those alongside cyclical stories, so the economic recovery in the industrials, in the consumer discretionary space, as well as some of the stable areas of the market like healthcare. So plenty of opportunities for investors.
Well, so Yana, what are the stories that are playing out in some of these what you call mispriced or underappreciated opportunities? Starting with healthcare.
Yeah, well, healthcare, I know I've talked to Carol many times before about healthcare. Tim, this is my first time talking to you about healthcare, but healthcare has been underappreciated by investors for a very long time, and I know this is our 12th day of the year, but it's finally working. This is a perfect area of the market where I think it's a hybrid. It offers investors both the earnings growth opportunity. The sector is expected to generate about 10% earnings growth next year, but it's trading at over 20% discount on a multiple basis relative to the S&P 500. So you're basically, allowing investors to participate in this growth at a significant discount to the market. And this is one of the few sectors of the market that is very idiosyncratic. And what I mean by that is you have defensive areas of the market like pharmaceuticals, but you also have high growth areas of the market like life science tools. I mean,
it's I have to say it's pretty remarkable. I was just doing a quick kind of playing around the Bloomberg and bringing up the S&P 500 healthcare sector. It's one of the major industry groups in the S&P. And you're right, we've seen some gains last year, but it was 11%. It was 18% in 2019. In 2018, it was up maybe about 4.5%. It's just amazing. It's despite we know that everybody's going to need more and more healthcare going forward, it's pretty anemic to some extent in comparison in terms of the returns, Yana.
You're absolutely right. I think a lot of this blame is really carried by the political backdrop that unfortunately many of these companies were hit with. And unfortunately, regulatory or political uncertainty doesn't usually bode well for multiples. But I think we're at this inflection point where I think the silver lining behind COVID is look what the human ingenuity and the innovation has enabled us to do, which is to provide folks with a vaccine in less than a year, right? So the picks and shovels of that business are legit, and now you have increased funding, you have tech advancement that I really think is revolutionizing both drug development and delivery of much-needed therapies, not just in fighting the virus, but other chronic diseases like cancer and others. So I really think this is one area of the market where investors will be well served because there's so many unique stories that are still trading at such discount to the market.
What about when it comes to technology? Because what's been getting a lot of attention, of course, over the last year has been what is referred to as big tech, both in a good way and also in a pejorative way too, I think. Software, services, security. What are the companies or the themes that you're seeing or looking for in 2021?
Great point. Last year, again, information technology was the best performing sector of the market, up 44%. What most folks don't appreciate is only a third of the sector outperformed the overall sector, meaning only a third of companies. So you've got hundreds of companies and only a third were able to match the sector returns. Why? Because many of the sort of accelerants were driven by the FANGs or the big cap guys, right? And what I'd like to highlight is big long-term secular themes are with us. It's expected that we're going to spend somewhere close to $3.8 trillion on IT services this year, just IT in general, and less than 10% is still being spent on cloud and security. And guess what? We're going to need a lot more of it. So
that's our future.
Tailwind is with us, and those companies will benefit.
Well, Yana, good to check in with you in this new year. Yana Martin, she's co-director of growth equity over at Eaton Vance, on the phone from Boston. I just want to mention a headline crossing. Walmart is indefinitely suspending contributions to lawmakers who voted against certification. I wonder, I'm expecting that this will grow legs, but I wonder how long it sticks.
Okay, so I'm just the cynic in the room here.
No, I'm with you on this.
And two things we should note here is I don't expect to be a lot of fundraising in the near future because we just finished a campaign cycle.
Right.
And so the money is not a situation right now. And I also wonder, we're seeing press releases about this right now, but when they go back to donating to lawmakers, especially in districts that are important and in states that are important, we're not going to see press releases from these companies saying, oh, we've resumed donations to these people.
And if they're asked about, they're going to say, well, the environment's changed. We're working through, it's a new world order, in Congress. And exactly. I'm going to join the Skeptics Club over there. All right, stick around. We've got the closing bell in just a moment.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. There you have it. Sound of the closing bell at the New York Stock Exchange as we wrap up trading on this Tuesday, January 12th. Folks from Advisor shares virtually ringing that closing bell. Today, a move higher for the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ. We'll give you the numbers and then the story in a moment. S&P up 1 point, little change, but a gain nonetheless, up less than 0.1%. 38.01 today on the S&P. Dow up 60, higher by 0.2%. Best level of the day have been up more than 90 points. Worst level of the day, the Dow have been down 119. A volatile session. NASDAQ up 36 for the NASDAQ Composite Index, a gain today of 0.3%. Russell 2000 up 1.8%. Dow Transports up 1.4%. Interesting day for the NASDAQ 100 Index. The Composite Index higher, but the NASDAQ 100 Index lower today by just about 0.1%. S&P little changed. Energy and consumer discretionary shares leading the gains. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing as I mentioned. Stocks edging higher. Benchmark Treasury note yields lingering at 10-month highs as investors mull the prospects of the economic recovery and the vaccine rollout. Now, as for the market backdrop, Yana Barton is co-director of growth equity at Eaton Vance. She was our guest moments ago right here on Bloomberg Business Week.
We've got a lot to digest right now, both on the fundamental basis as well as the macro basis, as well as the political side of the equation. But I think as an investor, our job is to look forward. And as we sit here today, we think that this is going to be a good backdrop for equity investors, particularly those focused on the long term.
Walmart halting donations to Republicans who objected to the election. That, according to Dow Jones, Walmart shares surging are up today by just about 1%. So again, recapping here, the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ eking out gains. S&P up by a point. The Dow up 60, up 0.2. NASDAQ up by 0.3%. We are awaiting the latest numbers out of KB Home. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Whoa, yeah, what I say.
Nobody move a muscle. Bloomberg Business Week. Movers and shakers.
Damn, Stippy, you got some move.
On Bloomberg Radio.
So you are listening to Bloomberg Radio. I'm Carol Massar along with Tim Stanovic in our Interactive Brokers studio. So let's dig a little bit deeper into the trade today because it's been an interesting day. Certainly one where we bounced around a little bit. We're definitely off our lows, as Charlie mentioned, and near our highs at the end of the day. But a day that kind of, for the most, I feel like the bulk of the day was kind of like a meh trade. And I just think there's a decent amount of news flow trying to figure out, you know, especially as we head into earnings. Dave, I think, was right to point out that we often see things kind of calm down because we want to see whether or not...
A little bit of a breather before earnings season starts. But I got to tell you, Carol, I've covered earnings for so long, and, you know, it always felt
You don't miss it, do you?
I do miss some companies. It is fun. I like covering tech earnings, but doesn't it feel like it's always earnings season?
It's always earnings.
Because as soon as it ends, like, earnings season starts again.
It's like we're counting down to the earnings season.
Yeah.
I will say, you know, as much as I make fun of it, it is a gut check from companies. And while I think it also sometimes handcuffs CEOs and the C-suite in terms of quarter to quarter, and I think that can be problematic, I do think it's a gut check to say, okay, where are we? What are you seeing? That kind of thing.
What I find most helpful when it comes to earnings is guidance and commentary around how, especially not necessarily CEOs, but how CFOs are planning for the future.
And CFOs became so much more important after the financial crisis. They used to be like the number guys, blah, 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 and then they became so part of strategic planning because it's the CFOs who got so many companies through the financial crisis. Just want to mention a headline, Walmart halting PAC donations to election objectors. That's coming from Dow Jones, so that's just crossing. You and I talked about Walmart before. GM, also another red sticky, as we like to call it at Bloomberg, closing at a record high of $47.82 a share, up 45% from the 2010 IPO. So GM has been on a tear. Listen, Mary Barra, the CEO, has really been reworking that company and I think moving it towards, many would argue, a company that exists in the 21st century.
Yeah, it's been really impressive what she's been able to do. And I think the conversation around cars has really focused a lot on Tesla because of Tesla's incredible performance.
Yeah.
But the other car companies haven't been sleeping.
No, not at all. Yeah. Is there somebody you want to mention specifically? No.
GM.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
GM. Well, listen, and I think when she got rid of a certain bunch of brands, people were like, oh my God, people out of work. But at some point, you've got to get rid of the underperforming brands, right? And reposition the company. All right, so let's get to Bloomberg News cross-asset reporter Sarah Ponczek, sitting there so patiently. Sorry, we were on a tear there.
I love listening to your conversation.
So what strikes you? Where do you want to take us?
So today, I'll first just highlight the reflation trade still well and on. Energy companies, your best performers in the S&P today, and not just your best performers, up another 3.5%. Already the best performing sector this year, now up about 15% or so in a very young 2021. At the same time, you see small caps up more than 1.5% once again today. So the same theme that really was dominant early on in 2021, it continues. But I guess I've been bringing you guys strange things lately, and there's one more that I've got to highlight today. This actually was highlighted by Joseph Saluzzi over at Themis Trading. And if you look at a day like yesterday...
I love Joe Saluzzi, by the way.
So this is a great statistic from him. It's honestly mind-blowing. If you look at the 10 most actively traded stocks yesterday across the U.S. Trading platforms, 6 of 10 were penny stocks, so have prices below $1. And those 6 stocks alone, they made up almost a fifth of all of stock market trading volume yesterday. How mind-blowing is that? Right.
And this doesn't even include, the one that Elon Musk tweeted about, right? This list doesn't include that.
This does not include Signal Advance, which is no longer a penny stock, thanks to the huge advance that we've seen. But one that is also just mind-blowing is there's a company called Zomedica that is a pet medicine company. It was a penny stock. Well, Carol Baskin of the Tiger King show actually mentioned it in a video, and it's been crazy over the last couple of days.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh, yes. And now it is up over 200% ever since her mention. That's over a matter of 3 trading days. So from Elon Musk and
Sarah,
did
you hold on?
What?
Carol, Sarah, did you make a bet with somebody that you had to bring in a reference to Tiger King today or something?
We used to do that on TV.
I did not. I wish I did.
What is going on here? This is like, talk about worlds colliding here. First of all, Tiger King was very 2020.
Yes.
And now it's 2021. So hearing a name like Carol Baskin.
Look, not much has changed. Not much has changed these days.
All I'm going to say is people are going to get hurt, Sarah, in this. No, in terms of the penny stocks, right?
And you're not talking about Tiger King.
No, but people did get hurt in Tiger King. To be continued. But I mean, in terms of penny stocks, right? People are going to get hurt.
Well, the amount of share trading volume that we're seeing in penny stocks these days is unbelievable. And sure, yes, when you have day traders and retail traders these days, it's a way to make a quick buck. But another way to view it, which is also an interesting way to just break up stock performance so far this year.
Right.
The lower your stock price, the better your performance has actually been.
All right. Interesting stuff. All right, Sarah, thank you so much. Quickly, we want to get to Dave Wilson, who has also been sitting there patiently with his stock of the day. Dave, what do you got?
Yeah, kind of looking back a bit, too. It's Land's End. The apparel retailer uses the slogan, "Let's get comfy." Tells you what kind of clothes they sell. They also provide home decor. Land's End was founded in 1963 and owned by Sears from 2002 to 2014 when it was taken public. Former Sears Holdings CEO Eddie Lampert and his hedge fund own a combined 61% stake. Land's End shares peaked in 2014, then tumbled as much as 93% through last April. They've rallied more than 6-fold since then, and the gains accelerated today after the company came out with a brighter fiscal fourth quarter outlook. They lifted their earnings forecast by about 20%. Raised their sales projection by about 4%. The new figures exceeded estimates of the only 2 analysts following the company in a Bloomberg survey. Land's End cited an emphasis on, quote, the work-from-home lifestyle and casual apparel demand, end quote. Now, the company shares rose to their highest price since July 2018, and they closed with a gain of more than 11%.
I knew that work-from-home thing was coming, Dave. I knew that was coming.
Comfy
I mean, you
clothes.
hear a name like Land's End, and you think comfy clothes. You're like, okay, it's sweatpants for Zoom calls,
Elastic.
right?
All that kind of thing, yeah.
Crocs maybe too, Dave?
I'm not going there. That was yesterday.
That was yesterday. Hey, Land's End up 536% since that April 3rd low.
Wow.
Wow is right. Yeah. Dave Wilson, good stuff. Love these, flashback names when it comes to your stock of the day. You have a good night. Get some sleep.
Thank you. I will. You too. I'll see you all tomorrow.
Put on those comfy clothes. Go home. All right, Tim, thank you so much. Let's get back to World and National News. Over to Nancy Lyons. We go comfy clothes, Nance, for everyone, right?
That's right. I'm all for that. Well, the FBI says their agents are leaving no stone unturned in the investigation of last week's deadly siege at the U.S. Capitol. During a news conference in the nation's capital, Assistant FBI Director Stephen D'Antuono says the investigation is a nationwide 24/7 operation.
I want to stress that the FBI has a long memory and a broad reach. Agents and our partners are on the streets investigating leads not only here in the D.C. area, but also across the country through the FBI's 56 field offices.
Federal prosecutors are looking at bringing significant cases involving possible sedition and conspiracy in connection with the riot. They have more than 170 files on individuals and have filed charges in 70 cases, and hundreds more are expected. The FBI is also defending its actions ahead of the riot, saying it briefed law enforcement within an hour after discovering an online warning about war and the storming of the U.S. Capitol. President Trump is sounding confident that he will remain in office until the inauguration, even though Democrats in Congress are pressing Vice President Mike Pence to use the 25th Amendment to remove him for being unfit.
The 25th Amendment is of zero risk to me, but will come back to haunt Joe Biden and the Biden administration. As the expression goes, be careful what you wish for. The impeachment hoax is a continuation of the greatest and most vicious witch hunt in the history of our country.
He spoke in Alamo, Texas, while promoting the border wall. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. Appreciate that. I'm Carol Masser in our Interactive Brokers studio. Let's bring in Charlie Pellet. Charlie, this is kind of a cool story by our Scott Moritz, who I love to talk to, and he's talking about Verizon Communications. Apparently, they're teaming up with UPS to deliver packages with 5G drones. You know, I feel like people keep talking about this. I'm waiting for them to be filling, our airspace, but here we go.
It's going to happen. Listen, I don't see this thing happening
anytime
at the Master.
soon.
No, at the Master House. I mean, it's not going to happen in Brooklyn. As I look out, I see a brownstone here, trees. You're not going to get drones dropping off packages in Brooklyn, New York. However, the Master household in New Jersey, with your spatial, with the estate that you've got there, you can have a drone fly in, drop it, take off.
I just hope they don't hit the horses. That's all I'm going to say. I live in an urban environment, an old row house. It's pretty city-ish.
Yeah. But the bottom line, just one of a number of big events coming out of CES today, Verizon Communications, and I can't speak for yourself, but I'm old enough to remember when it was the Consumer Electronics Show, and now it is CES. All of this happening virtually this year, but it's just interesting though that Verizon Communication teaming up, using their 5G network, teaming up with UPS to test out the use of 5G drones. And where are they going to be doing it? A Florida retirement community.
Yeah, well, those people are sitting inside, and there's lots of open space. Of course, it's kind of safe. I'm just going to say. No, listen, it's interesting. And CES, that's what it's about. It's like when you go to the auto show, right? And you have those concept cars. These are what, companies are striving for. And I do think it will have definitely some usage, Charlie, and I think you're right, to get all serious for a moment, is that when there's open spaces, like you can do these kind of drops, and maybe in emergency situations, you can do these kind of drops. I don't see how you do it, like you said, in an urban environment.
Exactly, and just want to bring along a headline, Carol, not to switch gears here, but Visa, Plaid announcing a mutual termination of their merger agreement. Developing story, I'm working on that after the bell.
All right, good stuff. We'll look for some more news out of that one. Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Masser, and we're going to check in with Jim Rickards. What he has to say.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Visa plan officially calling off their marriage plans after the Justice Department objected. Visa shares, they're down after hours by just about 1.9%. Earnings Watch just heard from KB Home. Fourth quarter EPS beat estimates. KB Home, KBH up today by 1.3%. It was an update on Wall Street, barely. Stocks edged higher. Benchmark Treasury note yields lingered at 10-month highs as investors mulled the prospects of the economic recovery and vaccine rollout. S&P did close in the green after fluctuating between gains and losses for much of the trading day. Big swings. The Dow, for example, worst level of the day, have been down 119. We had the Dow up at the best level, higher by 91 points today. But when it was all was said and done today, the Dow Jones Industrial Average did finish with a gain of 60 points, up 0.2%. S&P up a point, little change. NASDAQ up 36, up 0.3. 10-year yield 1.13%. Gold up 0.7, 18.56 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.8%, 53.18 a barrel. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, got it, Charlie. Thank you so much. Well, I think it's been about maybe a year or so since we last talked with him. Back with us is someone who has often had a cautious outlook on the financial world and the economic world. He's been a gold bug for a long time. It's a call which last year was spot on. Back with us is Jim Rickards. He's editor of Strategic Intelligence Newsletter. His latest book published in 2020, The New Great Depression, Winners and Losers in a Post-Pandemic World. He's the author of several books that have predicted a coming financial reset. And as I mentioned, has long recommended holding gold as a precaution for wealth preservation. And again, very, very true in 2020 as gold capped its best year in a decade last year. Jim joining us on the phone in Vermont. Jim, nice to have you here with us. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Carl. Great to be with you. Thanks.
Well, talk to me about what's top of mind, especially after the year that we've had, after the week that we have had politically. What's top of your mind as an investor?
Well, I'd like to say that now that we got through the recession in the first half of 2020 and with the pandemic winding down, it isn't, by the way, but the view was that it was going to wind down, and the vaccine is out there, that 2021 will be a year of a very strong recovery, but it's not. It looks like we're in a new recession beginning right now. So we had a recession in the first half of 2020, strong bounce back in the third quarter, but not strong enough, didn't get us out of where we were, didn't undo the damage, and now we're back into a recession. And the reason is very straightforward. The virus, everyone says it's another wave. It is. It's not twice as bad. It's 9 to 10 times worse when you look at the caseload and the fatalities, sadly. So that's where we are. That means we're locking down again, and that means we're crushing half the economy. So you can't have that combination without going back into a recession, and that's about where we are.
Is it safe to say recession for some and not for others? I mean, I bring this up because of the division that we've seen certainly in our economy. We constantly talk about division between Wall Street and Main Street. There are folks that have actually made a lot of money over the last 12 months. There are others, as we know, who can't even find enough money to put food on their table. So, tell me what kind of recession this is. Is it a recession that's not maybe similar to what we've had in the past?
Well, first of all, you're exactly right. And that's why the subtitle of my book, it's The New Great Depression, but the subtitle, Winners and Losers in a Post-Pandemic World. So I give one example. Everyone's familiar with the Weimar Germany hyperinflation of the early 1920s. Worst hyperinflation in the history of industrialized economies. But there was an individual named Hugo Stinnes. He saw it coming. He borrowed massively in Reichsmarks. That was the currency of the day. He invested in hard assets. He bought vessels, railroads, transportation, coal, steel. The hyperinflation came. He paid back his debts. I like to say it was pennies on the dollar, but it was like a hundredth of a penny on the dollar. The money was worthless. Right. And he kept the assets, and he became the richest man in Germany. Joe Kennedy shorted the stock market. Joseph P. Kennedy shorted the stock market ahead of the 29 crash and became one of the richest individuals in the United States. So even in pandemics, recessions, depressions, which is what it is, you can make a lot of money, but you have to know what you're doing. You have to pick out certain strategies.
Well, and it's interesting. Well, so does Bitcoin. And I got to ask you, because some people have talked about Bitcoin being kind of another version of gold, a safe haven. Do you see it that way? And is it of interest at all to you in an environment where it can be pretty tough?
It's not of interest at all to me. I follow
I'm not surprised about that.
Yeah, I follow it closely. Look, I did an interview in December 2017, and Bitcoin was about $8,000 at the time, but it had been going up $1,000 a day, like 5,000, 6,000, 7,000. And I said it's going to go to 20,000, and then it's going to crash. And that's exactly what happened. It happened over the coming weeks. By the end of January, it was down about, overall in the first quarter of 2018, it was down about 80%. So it's the same thing. It's clearly a bubble. You don't need I don't have a crystal ball, but you don't need one to see bubbles. Just look at the chart. This will crash again. But look at it. When I was a kid, there was a popular song called "Shout, Shout, Knock Yourself Out." And if you like Bitcoin, knock yourself out. But I don't own it, and to me, it's gambling. I prefer roulette. Actually, it's a little more fun. But I don't really put much stock in it.
You say we're in a new Great Depression. So how long does it last? I mean, give me an idea. And is it something similar, akin to something that we've seen, if not in our economic past, something that we've seen in our historical past?
Historical is the right word. It's a great question, Carl. You have to go back to the 1930s. This does not look. 2008 was a financial crisis. This is an economic crisis, which is a different thing. So you do have to go back to the 1930s. But here's the thing. I grew up in the 50s and early 60s, and I did not live through the Great Depression, but my parents did and my grandparents did. So I was kind of raised. That was a prosperous time in America, but I was kind of raised with a Depression mentality. We were little kids. We went out with our wagons and collected tin cans and newspapers because, not for environmental reasons, maybe it was good, but we were recycling tin because you could build battleships with it. Right. And the point is, that didn't change until the late 60s when the baby boomers, came of age and all that. So the effects of this of the Great Depression lasted for 30 years. That'll be the same thing this time. By the way, there's a study, Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco economists, 2 academic collaborators. They looked at every pandemic in the last 650 years, going back to the Black Death in 1350. There were 15 in which 100,000 or more people died. And what they showed, and by the way, this is going to be number 3 on the list by the time we're done. Once you get past 2 million fatalities, it's going to be number 3. They said the effects last for 30 to 40 years. So when Jay Powell says rates aren't going up till 2023, my answer is, hey, Jay, try 2043, because that looks more like it.
All right. Sit tight for a second. We're going to come back and continue this conversation, certainly a timely one. We're going to get back to Jim Rickards, editor of Strategic Intelligence Newsletter. His latest book, he's author of several, including New York Times bestsellers. His latest book, though, that was out last year, The New Great Depression, Winners and Losers in a Post-Pandemic World. We'll continue with him in just a moment. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. I'm Carol Masser in our Interactive Brokers studio, and this is Bloomberg Radio.
Broadcasting live to New York, Bloomberg 1130. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 1061. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Masser in our Interactive Brokers studio. We're going to get back to Jim Rickards in just a moment. I've got a question coming in on Twitter that I want to bring to Jim's attention, so we'll talk to him in just a second. Get back to that. Right now, let's get back to Charlie Pellet.
All right, lots going on after the bell, but we got you covered because that is what we do here at Bloomberg Radio. Visa walking away from its proposed $5.3 billion acquisition of Plaid following a Justice Department lawsuit to stop the deal on antitrust grounds. Visa shares, they're tumbling after hours, down now by 2.7%. KB Home reporting earnings per share for the fourth quarter that beat the average analyst estimate. Shares up by more than 3% after hours. It was an up day on Wall Street today with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing. Stocks edged higher, however. Benchmark Treasury note yields lingering at 10-month highs as investors mull the prospects of the economic recovery and vaccine rollout. What a choppy day. As I mentioned, the S&P up today barely, higher by 1 point, up by less than 0.1%. The Dow up 60, up 0.2. NASDAQ up 36, a gain there of 0.3%. 10-year yield now 1.13%. Gold up 0.6%. Spot gold up more than $11 the ounce at $18.54. West Texas Intermediate crude at $53.31 a barrel now, up today by 2%. So an up day on Wall Street. As for the economic and the market outlook, Lauren Goodwin is multi-asset portfolio strategist at New York Life.
We're very much on board with the reflationary trade. What we're seeing right now in the economy is a classic early cycle environment. And so all the asset classes that you've heard, supported by improving economic growth, moving back towards trend, small caps, value stocks, international equity, high yield, very much on board with that as a tactical play.
General Motors making a push into electric commercial delivery vehicles starting this year with a new wholly owned company called BrightDrop that not only supplies battery-powered vans but also offers fleet management services. Investors like the news. GM up today by 6.2%. Netflix will release 70 original movies this year. Netflix shares lower today by 1%. Sources tell Bloomberg Alimentation Couche-Tard, that's the Canadian convenience store giant that owns the Circle K chain, is exploring a potential acquisition of French grocer Carrefour, that according to people with knowledge of the matter. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Wow, say that 5 times fast, Charlie Pellet.
Don't put me up to it. Alimentation Couche-Tard.
So impressive. All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Want to get right back to Jim Rickards. He's editor of Strategic Intelligence Newsletter. His book out, The New Great Depression, Winners and Losers in a Post-Pandemic World. So, Jim, I have to address something that someone tweeted at me, and they, because we have some really great listeners, and they said they were listening to your comment about how you prefer roulette. They said that's a game of total non-game theory, randomness. Why would you choose that? What would you say to them?
This is because it's more fun. You can have a drink while you're at it. It was. I was sort of saying that. Look, Bitcoin is a form of gambling, and that's fine. I'm all for entertainment, but I don't take it seriously enough. Just on a serious note, Carol.
Yeah.
People say, well, Bitcoin's going to replace the dollar, gold as a reserve currency, et cetera. People don't understand what a reserve currency is. So China has $1.4 trillion in dollars, right? But they don't have stacks of $100 bills in the basement of the People's Bank of China. You have to invest in securities. They invest in U.S. Treasuries. So the thing that makes your reserve currency is not the currency, it's the bond market. There is no Bitcoin bond market. You can buy some Bitcoin if you want to, but there's no yield, there's no maturity, there's no, you don't have all the hallmarks of a bond market, which is why the dollar is the leading reserve currency. Same thing with euros, although there's no euro bond in the sense of full faith and credit bond, but you can buy German bonds,
right,
Italians if you want. But that doesn't exist. There's no payment system. There's no rule of law. There's nothing around Bitcoin that makes it a reserve currency. So it has no chance or no place of replacing the dollar. But as I say, as a form of entertainment, it's available.
Right. I hear you. I just think about when junk bonds, though, were something that people considered controversial. And I know it's not apples to apples, but, I guess time will tell ultimately. It does feel like the Bitcoin conversation, though, is very different from the one that we were having a couple of years ago when I think we were all scratching our heads still. It feels like there is a certain amount of legitimacy that has been put to it.
I don't know where popularity, yes, attention, absolutely. I don't shy away from controversy. I think
I know
well enough, but a lot of junk bonds defaulted in 1989 to go back to that recession. So look, there's risk and reward, and you pick your place on the spectrum. I don't stand up against Bitcoin, but if people ask me, I say I don't see it really has any future.
Hey, just got a couple of minutes. I want to go through kind of a little bit of a rapid fire of things that I know that you have some thoughts on, but just quickly, if I say specifically, let me see where I want to start. Fired employees, what's going to happen to them?
Many are not coming back. The people look down their nose at small and medium-sized enterprises, but they are 50% of all jobs, 45% of GDP. When these restaurants close, they're not. The restaurants, bars, nail salons, many of them are not reopening permanently. So it's going to be a long haul.
Bankruptcies.
They're lining up at the bankruptcy courts. We all know the names, Neiman Marcus, JCPenney, Hertz, et cetera. More are on the way. It takes a while for these things to play out, particularly in commercial real estate.
Some of those names, I think folks would say, listen, was the overstored retail, they were going to happen anyway. It just got expedited. Are you saying it's going to be much more broader and more mass in terms of bankruptcies?
Sure. If you had 10 floors of a midtown office building, you probably realize you only need 2 floors. No one would have imposed work from home, but it happened anyway, and actually it works.
That real estate thing you think is here to stay, and that's going to lead to a bunch of bankruptcies?
Because look, you've got tenants aren't paying rent. There's a eviction moratoria. But the landlords are not. The landlords are leveraged themselves. They borrowed the money. The money's in commercial real estate, mortgage-backed securities. And by the way, look in your 401k. You might own some.
Right, I know, especially, no doubt about it. Banks, what's going to happen to banks in your view? And are you talking about the big banks?
Yeah, banks are going to be fine. They're too big to fail. Now, they did improve their capital ratios, and they're more sound, but they're just too big to fail, so they're not going to fail.
What about when it comes to things like social disorder, which we have obviously saw a lot over the last week?
Great question. I have a whole chapter on that. Chapter 5 of my book, The New Great Depression, talks about the mental health aspects of this. And by the way, the lockdowns don't work. There's good evidence for that. But they do destroy the economy. But if you're stuck in quarantine, it's like being in jail. Suicides have tripled. Drug abuse is up. Alcohol abuse is up. Domestic abuse is up. It makes people angry, violent, and depressed. So the things we're seeing in the streets, they're going to continue to happen, partly because of COVID.
Listen, 30 seconds left. You've often kind of had a grim view of the outlook. Do you see any optimism on the horizon? Just quickly.
You could get a lot of growth in the economy if you stop the lockdowns. Lockdowns don't work, but they do destroy. They don't work for the virus. They do destroy the economy. So get rid of the lockdowns and let's get back to business.
I know there's a lot of medical experts that we talk to that would disagree with you on that, but they would agree that we need to get the vaccine out. All right, Jim, thank you so much. Jim Rickards, editor of Strategic Intelligence Newsletter, his latest book, The New Great Depression, Winners and Losers in a Post-Pandemic World. As he reminded us, investors are those who can definitely win in this world as well, and he gets into that in his book. All right, back to World and National News. Back on over to Nancy Lyons in D.C. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Carol. The Federal Bureau of Investigation says it is carefully and precisely putting together a wide and deep picture of the events surrounding last week's riot at the Capitol. FBI Assistant Director in Charge Steve D'Antuono says the Bureau has a huge array of methods for putting the puzzle together.
Scrubbing video, we're talking to witnesses, we're talking to individuals that we arrest, and we're gathering that picture, that intelligence, if you will, to understand what happened on the 6th, that day, in the Capitol, outside the Capitol.
Of the 170 cases that have been opened, which they expect to grow into the hundreds, they've charged 70 individuals. President Trump says be careful what you wish for as House lawmakers consider a resolution calling on Vice President Mike Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment to declare the president unable to serve. Trump spoke today about the violence at the Capitol.
Millions of our citizens watched on Wednesday as a mob stormed the Capitol and trashed the halls of government. As I have consistently said throughout my administration, we believe in respecting America's history and traditions, not tearing them down. We believe in the rule of law, not in violence or rioting.
The House is expected to vote tomorrow to formally impeach the president a second time. The New York Times is reporting Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has told associates he believes Trump did commit impeachable offenses, and he is pleased that Democrats are moving to impeach him. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons. This is Bloomberg.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. I'm Carol Masser along with Charlie Pellet. And Charlie, I'm going to do an audible. I want to just mention another headline that crossed. In the meantime, we're going to talk about Jeff Goodlock. There's our top live blog. He is making some comments and our team is tracking it. But I do want to reiterate a headline from the New York Times. The Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, said to be pleased about the effort to impeach Trump. So again, this is coming from the New York Times. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said to be pleased about the effort that is underway in the U.S. Congress to impeach Trump. So we're tracking that. Charlie Pellet is here. And forgive me, Charlie, because I did call an audible because this caught my attention. Right now, the top live blog on the Bloomberg terminal, Jeff Goodlock, CEO, Chief Investment Officer, co-founder of Double Line Capital, a voice we track when it comes to certainly fixed income markets and just what's going on in the economy. Our team is, checking in on some of the headlines, and he said he says he's neutral on the dollar. He says the dollar is in a secular downtrend. That's his view. What's interesting is, and I got to find it, he said that he's blogging this from his New York City apartment, decked in his favorite loungewear. So I guess you can count me among those who see the benefits of working from home. I thought that was kind of funny.
Like you see, I'm just thinking back to the earlier conversation about Land's End that you were having with Dave Wilson,
right?
Top of the hour there, right? There's an image. Jeff
A little bit of
Gunlock
elastic
sitting
for everyone.
Exactly, but a couple of other comments that from Gunlock in yesterday. One that I thought was very interesting. He said Bitcoin is in bubble territory. Now I'm not sure whether that was before or after the massive sell-off that we saw in Bitcoin, but he's certainly following that and saying that it does appear to be in bubble territory. Also says that he doesn't think that we have left the recession yet. Interesting, coming from Jeff Gunlock.
Mirrors kind of what we just heard from our last guest, Jim Rickards. He also says what started with bartenders, baristas, et cetera, will become something that affects middle management. And I think this is something we have to watch, Charlie, big time on the labor front. All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you as always. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week, and this is Bloomberg Radio.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Urban Outfitters shares down now by more than 3% after a tough holiday shopping season. Also, the departure of a group CEO. Visa, Plaid have terminated their merger pact after a U.S. antitrust lawsuit. KB Home's fourth quarter EPS beat estimates. Stocks rise today. The dollar weakens. Stocks edging higher. Benchmark Treasury note yields lingering at 10-month highs. Right to the numbers. S&P up a point. Little change. Turbulent session today. The Dow up 60, higher by 0.2%. Best level of the day. The Dow had been up 91. Worst level down 119. Volatile trading today. The Dow ended the day up by 0.2%. Nasdaq up 36, up 0.3. 10-year up 5/32. 10-year yield 1.12%. Gold up 0.6%. 18.55 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 2%. 53.32 a barrel. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. So we've been talking a lot about, during the pandemic, the use of alcohol. Certainly it's been up in terms of consumption, but it'll be a while before we know about the long-term usage of it. But some have been taking it into their own hands by kicking off the new year with a dry January. With more on that, Tim Stanovic and I recently caught up with Bill Schufelt. He's co-founder actually, and CEO of Athletic Brewing, maker of craft non-alcoholic beers. And he talked specifically about the upside of stepping away from alcohol.
Going into the new year is such a great time for people to kind of hit pause, goal set, and think about what they want to achieve in the year ahead. That could be professionally, it could be with their diet, it could be workouts, it could be sleep, mindfulness, relationships, anything. And there's one pretty consistent variable. If you pull alcohol and some unhealthy eating out of that, it makes it really easy to focus on what your goals are and like really kickstart the year in a productive way. And it's a trend that's been increasingly popular, like exponentially so over the past few years. Over 20% of U.S. adults participated in Dry January last year, and anecdotally, it feels much higher this year.
Bill, I know the company's in sort of growth mode right now. Do you see a big uptick in sales in January typically?
We do. So the average uptick month over month from January to December the past 2 years has been about 30%. I will say this year our website traffic is up about 95% month over month even.
Tim, you're a non-alcoholic beer drinker,
I
right?
I am, and it's interesting. I'm not exclusively a non-alcoholic beer drinker, but that's the reason why I wanted to get Bill on our show, is because the way that my own habits have changed during the pandemic, and also with starting this new job, which requires me to get up so much earlier.
Yeah.
So what I've decided to do is actually not drink alcohol during the week. A friend of mine made the recommendation to me, who hosts radio very early in the morning, and he said that is the key to a good night's sleep. And I actually I do drink Athletic Brewing beer. But it's also interesting because I've noticed that the marketing is not traditional beer marketing, right? This is a company that seems to embrace the idea of, it's sort of like, Bill, I think of Patagonia, like the company Patagonia when I see your marketing. It's very focused on like the outdoors and skiing and mountain biking.
It's like what the company was born out of is exactly the occasion set that you're talking about. I was a huge foodie, craft beer guy. I loved all sorts of social, family, all sorts of normal occasions. But I also had this very serious day job at a large hedge fund. I loved waking up at 5 o'clock, working out, being on point all day. I was starting to run ultra marathons on the weekends. And really in that, alcohol had a smaller and smaller place, but I still wanted a great beer I could have during the week and wake up at 5 o'clock. And I quickly realized in cutting back on alcohol, I was sleeping right through the night for the first time in years. I was on point all day. My workouts were great. And it was like the best life hack I'd ever uncovered. And so like my very normal modern adult lifestyle led us in this direction to discover non-alcoholic beer. And then when I got there, I found out non-alcoholic beer, if you take out the alcohol, which is a diuretic and super dehydrating, non-alcoholic beer is actually full of electrolytes. It's anti-inflammatory. It's super low in calories. Our flagship Golden Ale is 50 calories and gluten removed. So you can kind of have your cake and eat it too and get a great night's sleep not have all the calories and the weight gain and stuff. In terms of the brand ethos, we really wanted to make non-alcoholic beer positive and aspirational for the first time. And we're all about the thing that made me go from like even considering quitting a very stable financial job was the positive impact we could have. And that's all positive impact on our customers' health, activity, fitness, and ultimately then their communities and the environment. And yeah, we donate 2% of all sales to trail and park cleanups. And it, like, in terms of being all about being healthy, active, outdoors, and inclusive, we only get one chance at this environment, and we are making a huge dent as a company, having it hard-coded into our ethos from the start.
Right.
And we'd really like to see more companies do that, honestly. Like, 2% of sales isn't the biggest number in the world, but it makes a huge dent.
But if you get enough people doing it, that 2% becomes something significant and impactful. Hey, last question. Can you go it alone? Anheuser-Busch or one of the big guys calls you and said, listen, we want you as part of our portfolio. Can be a good thing, but I don't know if that's the kind of identification you want because you guys seem like you're going your own way here.
Honestly, we're so focused on our own growth and goals, and we've been laying bricks forever for like a breakout year, like it's coming ahead.
Yeah.
We feel like we're in the second or third inning here. I could see an IPO at some point. Our team is super proud of what we've built.
Yeah.
And behind that, like, we have an incredible investor team who we haven't even gone public with.
Do you want to go public now? Because I was going to ask you who's behind you guys. Is it angel investing? It doesn't sound like you guys are you're not bootstrapping it.
Yeah, so I've actually never talked about this publicly, but we do have we've been incredibly fortunate about the people who have found our beer in the world and reached out. Some huge names in that, including J.J. Watt is an early investor of ours and supporter. He posts sometimes, he like sneaks it into his Instagram stories sometimes. Lance Armstrong, David Chang, the famous chef.
Yeah.
He just like a huge foodie and a big beer guy, and he got it right from the start. And then we've been super lucky to have Justin Tuck, the New York Giants defensive end, multiple Super Bowl winner.
Right.
He's been a super early investor and advocate.
I met him last year actually at the Super Bowl. So, I mean, these guys are fascinating in terms of where they end up investing their money.
Yeah, and most times they've found us, which is like they are on it and super and like ready to support things they believe in.
Yeah.
And along those lines, Blake Mykowski, the founder of Tom's,
Tom's
was
Shoes,
he was one of our first investors and a longtime board member and advisor. The common thread through that whole group really is that our Two for the Trails and Impact program really spoke out to them, like the impact we're having. All those guys are hugely charitable. And like from JJ and his Hurricane Harvey relief to what David Chang has done for mental health, Blake Mykowski with Tom's, Lance with Livestrong, it's like a hugely charitable group. And that has been a big thread.
That was Bill Schufelt. He's the CEO and co-founder of Athletic Brewing. They're a maker of craft non-alcoholic beers. There is more of that conversation. Tim and I sat down and talked with him for a while, and that complete conversation, it'll be on our Bloomberg Business Week podcast feed beginning at just about 5 p.m. Wall Street time, so just a few minutes from now. And as you could hear, he really kind of played it all out for us, telling us about his investors and plans for potentially going public, some of that information revealing for the first time. So definitely worth listening to the entire conversation. He gets into some of the new beers that they've gone, and he talks a little bit more about the metrics and the growth that they've seen because it's been pretty explosive. So again, that entire interview at Bloomberg.com or Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to stick around for Sound On. That is coming up next with Kevin. So really interesting lineup once again in terms of some of the news coming out of Washington, including Democratic Representative Abigail Spanberger of Virginia and Rick Davis, former campaign manager for John McCain's 2008 presidential run and a Bloomberg contributor. So stick around for that. Have a safe evening, everyone. This is Bloomberg.